Neverwar, Mage Saga Book 9, written and narrated by J.J. Green. Chapter 20. Regardless of the urgency of their situation, Carina had to sleep. After a quick dinner, she went with Bryce to their cabin and got ready for bed. As soon as they were under the covers, Bryce wrapped his arms around her. "Try not to worry too much. We'll figure things out. We've got through worse things than this." "I know, but—" "And we've made it this far. If it wasn't for your determination, we could never have done it. You should be proud." "Yeah, but—" "Go to sleep." He knew her well. He added, "Unless you want to." "Too tired." "Sure." He snuggled closer. Warm and secure, her weariness overcame her anxiety and she drifted off. Hours later, something woke her. She wasn't sure what. Bryce was lying on his back, quietly snoring. It couldn't have been that. She was well used to his sleeping habits, as no doubt he was to hers. A tiny light overhead gave the cabin minimal illumination, just enough to avoid utter darkness. Bryce's bare chest rose and fell. She laid a hand on it, appreciating the familiar sensation. At the meeting, Ava had mentioned the wish of couples to settle on Earth and raise families. Bryce had voiced the possibility for them too, a long time ago. Though their experiences on Sotloza had dissuaded him of the urgency, she had no practical objection. The only problem was, the odds of their offspring being mages was 50-50. And she didn't want to bring a child into a world where they might be feared and hated, perhaps exploited. She would never forget the life Ma had endured. Creating a new person, knowing that a similar life for them was a risk, no matter how remote, was something she could never do. But that didn't mean she and Bryce couldn't be happy. Over the course of the voyage, her feelings for him had deepened, and she was in no doubt that at the matching on Pyrene, when mages had the opportunity to find their life partners, she had made the right choice. Raising herself up on one elbow, she leaned over to kiss him. It took him a moment to wake up, and when he did, he was a little startled until he realized what was going on. Then he returned her kiss. She said, "I'm not so tired now." He smiled and turned onto his side, taking her into his arms. They kissed again. Her earcom chirruped. "Shit." She reached for the side table where it lay and popped it into her ear. "Yeah? Get to the bridge, Lin," Jackson said. "You want to see this?" "It's Jackson," she told Bryce. "Something's up. You should come too." After hastily pulling on some clothes, they jogged through the passageways. Jackson didn't provide any updates along the way, so she guessed whatever the issue was, it couldn't be that urgent. What she saw as she walked onto the bridge contradicted her assumption. What the hell? In the center of the bridge hung a hollow, representing what she assumed was readings from the short-range scanners. Somewhere near the Bathsheba was a spacefaring vessel. She didn't recognize the type, but it wasn't much bigger than a shuttle. "How long has that been here?" "Only a few minutes," Jackson replied. "Comms has been trying to hail her, but no luck so far." The comms officer was speaking into her mic. She looked over and gave a slight shake of her head. "Keep trying," Carina ordered. "It has to be from Earth," said Bryce. "Well, duh," said Van Hasty. "Unless you know of another inhabited planet in this system." "No need to guess how they found us either," Carina said. "Damn it. I was so busy worrying about our problems, I didn't think about the repercussions of what happened today. If the hostile mages know we arrived from space, they know there's a colony ship somewhere close by. And the obvious place to hide it around here is behind this big old satellite. Now they've found us," Jackson said. "What do we do about it? If they didn't mean nasty business, they would answer our hail. Is it time to turn on the obliterator?" That old thing, Van Hasty scoffed. We haven't used it in years. Someone will have to dust off the cobwebs, or it might blow us up instead. Sounds like a job for Chertang. Van Hasty shook her head emphatically. That's a negative. If we get him in here, his goddamned loudmouth girlfriend's gonna follow him in. The irony of the burly female merc calling Cheapy loudmouthed wasn't lost on Carina, but she kept her opinion to herself. Do we know if it's carrying weapons? She studied the hollow, but it was hard to tell what might be armaments. Jackson replied, If she has, she hasn't used them. He checked his console. Scanners aren't detecting anything powering up. It would take balls to fire on a ship 100 times the size of your own, Bryce commented. If their mission isn't offensive, said Carina, and they don't want to talk, they're here for surveillance. They want to know what they're up against. While we've been chatting, they've been taking readings, finding out as much as they can about us. Let's not give them the luxury, Jackson said. I'll call Chertang. No, wait. She chewed the side of her thumb. The Bathsheba could easily destroy the little vessel, providing her captain was stupid enough to stick around while the obliterator built energy. But there was the need for secrecy to consider. Astronomy might no longer be of much interest to people on Earth, but there had to be a few diehards with telescopes who wouldn't fail to notice a sudden massive burst of power on the far side of the moon. Keeping a violent conflict hidden from Earth eyes was paramount. Besides, there was another good reason to not destroy the enemy vessel. I don't want to annihilate the ship, she said. Just scare it off. We can do that easily, said Jackson. We can fire this bird's pulse cannon across her bows. That should give 'em the willies. Yeah, Carina agreed. Do it. She sat down, keeping her gaze focused on the hollow image. If the pulse cannon don't do the trick, firing up the obliterator will, Bryce said reassuringly, taking the adjacent seat. The cannon fired. Streaks of light streamed above and below the enemy vessel. There was no need for a repeat of the warning. Her thrusters spurted and she slipped from sight, disappearing over the moon's rocky horizon. I dunno, Van Hasty said ruefully. Maybe we should have destroyed that ship while we could. They can't have many space-worthy craft, and we don't want them to think we're pussies. They don't need spacecraft, Carina replied. They must know the reason we came all this way is because we want to settle on Earth. So winning a space battle isn't important. The battle for what we want is going to take place on the surface. Blowing up their ship wouldn't have made any difference. They wouldn't risk putting anyone important in danger. But this way, she got to her feet and opened a screen. We can read her trace. Jackson laughed. And find out where she goes. You always were a smarty pants, Carina Lin. Too smart for her own good, said Van Hasty. 6 days. Chapter 21. The shuttle swept low over a vast tree canopy, stretching to the horizon on every side. Blazing sunlight glinted from every leaf under an azure sky. This is where the vessel landed, asked Bryce. He was crowded into the pilot's cabin with Carina and Parthenia, who had insisted on returning to the surface, despite Carina's protests. Somewhere hereabouts, Bibic replied, nodding toward an undefined spot a few 100 meters below. Carina decided to voice the obvious question. But how? Bibic shrugged. That's for you guys to figure out. Just let me know where to set this bird down. That was another unanswerable question. Do another circuit, Carina replied. We need some time to think about it. They returned to the passenger cabin. Maybe the scan data is wrong, said Parthenia. We should comm the ship and get someone to check it. I checked it twice already. Carina slumped into a seat. I wouldn't bring us all this way without confirming it. This is where the spy ship landed.
Maybe they have a special caste that allows them to dissolve trees,
Bryce said. And regrow them in a day? Asked Carina. That isn't what's happened, believe me. I have an idea what it is, but I don't know what we can do about it.
It's semblance, right?
Asked Darius. Yes, Parthenia exclaimed. That's it. It has to be.
Semblance?
Bryce frowned.
That's a new one, to me at least.
No, it isn't, said Carina. You remember the Dirksen headquarters on Ostalon in the mountains?
Oh yeah, the entrance was fake.
We encountered the same caste on Magog. The boundary of the Dark Mage's estate was false. You could step through it and see the real boundary, the same as we stepped through the rock into the mountain castle. Semblance creates an illusion, mirroring something nearby.
I get it now. The trees aren't real. They're obscuring a shuttle landing site.
It doesn't really help though, does it? Parthenia asked. Carina replied, At least we've confirmed this is mage work, ancient mage work. I didn't know about semblance until we encountered the mountain castle, and I didn't have a name for it until we met the Dark Mage way on Magog. My grandmother never taught me the caste, and Ma didn't teach it to her kids, so I guess it must have been forgotten by the mages in our sector. Darius said,
I wonder what other castes Earth mages can do that we can't.
Who knows, said Parthenia. Not too many, I hope. But to return to my point, knowing that the shuttle landing site is there, even though we can't see it, isn't helpful. Even if we could figure out exactly where it is, we can't land there ourselves. Assuming Bibic could set us down in an open spot, Darius can't keep our shuttle cloaked forever.
Bryce groaned. You mean we have to trek in? How far? Conditions down there must be shit.
And there will be snakes and spiders, Parthenia added. But I don't see a way around it. It isn't as bad as it looks, said Carina. We can transport part of the way. If we can't see the landing site, we have rough coordinates from the trace data. I'll ask Bibic to find the closest place to land, then we'll take it from there. She returned to the pilot's cabin to speak to him, but deeper problems were bothering her. Problems she wanted to understand better before she mentioned them to the others. Why had the people who had spied on them constructed a secret base deep within a jungle and obscured it with semblance? Nala had scoured Earth's news reports and found no mention of a spacecraft visiting the moon and returning. Yet surely it must have been noticed, if only by people who watched the skies as a hobby. Somehow these people were being silenced. So the base was hidden from regular view, and whoever was running it had influence within the highest level of Earth's governments. Why go to all this trouble to keep their activities secret? And how were they managing it? Something nefarious was going on, and it didn't only involve mages. Parthenia and Bibic were taking a while to say goodbye before the party set off to find the shuttle landing site. Carina waited patiently. The two had been serious for a couple of years, and after what had happened to Shao, it was natural that Parthenia would be concerned about leaving her partner alone. He would be tens of kilometers from help on Earth, and hundreds of clicks from his merc buddies on the Bathsheba. He wasn't a mage, so he couldn't send if he needed them, and they couldn't be sure their comm would work over the distance.
It was nice of Bibic to volunteer to bring us down,
Bryce commented as they waited. I think he felt obliged. Shao would have done it, but it wouldn't be right for her to take all the risks. Darius said,
I could stay with him if it would be best. I don't mind.
Carina shook her head. We need you too,
more than you know.
The area nearest to their anonymous enemy's base that was sufficiently open to land the shuttle was a sandy beach at the edge of the jungle. The place was utterly deserted. No signs of human habitations or activity were visible. Though it was conceivable people lived within the jungle bordering the ocean, they couldn't be technologically advanced and so were unlikely to pose a threat. They waited in silence as the waves rose and fell and the steady sea breeze ruffled the palm tree leaves. From somewhere in the forest came the shrill cry of a bird. Parthenia emerged from beneath the shuttle's new camouflage sheet, which mimicked the edge of the shoreline. She looked as though she'd been crying, but her expression became neutral as she walked over, trudging through the loose sand. Darius put a hand on her shoulder. "I'm sure he'll be fine. We're in the middle of nowhere, and no one will have spotted where we landed. I was cloaking the ship." She stiffened, brushing her hair from her eyes and ignoring her brother's reassurances. She asked, "Are we transporting directly there? No stops?" "I don't see any point," Carina replied. "It's a long way, but I'm sure Darius can manage it." Looking at her brother, she added, "Right, I can do it, but how close do we want to be? They might be expecting us." You're right. They might have guessed we could track their ship's trace. In case they've posted lookouts, shall we say 1K out? We can check things out as we get closer and reassess." She scanned the others' faces for approval. Bryce grimaced but said nothing. Darius made his cast, and they appeared on a raised portion of ground, thick tree trunks surrounding them. They seemed to be alone. Unfortunately, the high elevation didn't give them a good vantage point. All that could be seen was ranks of trees hung with vines and moss, descending down the slope. The line where reality ended and the semblance began was impossible to spot. The humidity was stifling. Carina was instantly coated in sweat, and the local insect life had discovered them almost as quickly. A flying creature alighted on the back of her hand and began to probe with its proboscis. She killed it with a slap. "Anyone know a protect against bloodsuckers cast?" Bryce asked hopefully. "Sorry, but no," Darius replied. "I could try to invent one, but it would take me a while. Another time." Bryce took out an interface from his backpack, consulted it, and pointed. "The shuttle landing site is that way." "Should I cloak us?" asked Darius. "Save it for when we really need it," Carina replied. "I think we're okay for now." "We waited too long on our first mission to Earth," Parthenia countered. "Maybe it would be a good idea to use it preemptively. We have quite a walk ahead of us over rough terrain. If Darius cloaks us the entire way, he'll use up his elixir supply." Parthenia shrugged. "I'm just saying, we might not have been captured on our first mission if—" "I hear you. We'll cloak when we're 200 meters out, or if we spot anyone." They set off down the slope. After 5 minutes of battling invertebrates literally after their blood, while also slithering down the leaf mold and loose soil, clinging to plant stems and draping vines for support, Carina cursed. Why the hell did they build a freaking shuttle landing site out here? Bryce asked. "You mean why not somewhere more convenient, like an air-conditioned shopping mall?" "That's exactly what I mean. We could browse the latest fashions while fighting our enemies," said Darius. "Fern and Oriana would be totally on board with that." Parthenia murmured, "I hope Bibic is all right." As they reached the lower ground, the insect life increased. A black cloud descended, and soon every square centimetre of opened skin was under attack. Carina pulled her shirt sleeves over her hands and the hood of her jacket over her head, but her efforts barely helped. "This is impossible," Bryce complained, running his hands over his face. "I agree," said Parthenia. "We can't deal with this any longer. We simply have to transport closer." Carina couldn't argue. "Darius, can you cloak us and then put us 100 meters from the coordinates?" The insects were gone, and so was the humidity. Cool, dry air sucked the sweat from her skin. She lowered her hood. The same deep blue sky she'd glimpsed in gaps in the canopy still hung overhead, but the view had altered in every other way. Where there had once been deep brown forest floor lay an expanse of grey concrete. Towering trees had been replaced by columns of shining steel. The spacecraft that had spied on the Bathsheba stood on its pad in the distance, and 4 other craft were positioned nearby. The enemy didn't have just one space-travelling vessel, it had 5. The shock she felt seemed to extend to the others. For several moments no one spoke. Then Bryce said, "Well, we found what we were looking for. Now what?" "I guess we get closer and see what else we can find out." "I cast the cloak to a diameter of roughly 5 meters," said Darius. "If anyone steps outside the circle, they risk being seen." Figures moved between the columns and the shuttles. They looked more like techies and mechanics than guards. But Darius's reminder still applied. There was little chance that the sudden appearance of a bunch of insect-bitten strangers would go unnoticed. "There's some powerful magic going on here," Bryce commented as they walked. "It isn't magic," Carina replied irritably before asking, "What do you mean?" "The whole place is air-conditioned, and I can't see any barriers, can you?" As well as no ceiling visible above, forest fringed the site on every side. Something was confining the controlled atmosphere. "Can semblance do this?" Parthenia asked. Carina didn't know the answer. She hadn't noticed the phenomenon the 2 previous times she'd encountered the cast. In a sense, it wasn't important. Generating an illusion this vast was impressive work by itself. An opening appeared at the base of a column, and a 4-wheeled vehicle sped out. It was the kind of passenger-carrying automotive generally absent from Earth, according to Matt. The top was open, and sitting in it were 6 men in 3 rows. Only one figure, seated at the front, wasn't in uniform. "Shit," breathed Bryce. The man in plain clothes was pointing in their direction. "Don't worry," Carina said. "He can't possibly see us." "Are you sure?" She hesitated. The car was heading their way. She looked over her shoulder. Nothing stood between them and the edge of the site. "I don't think so." Darius was also staring, dumbfounded, at the approaching vehicle. "I definitely cloaked us." The lead guard lifted a gun and aimed. "Maybe you should," Carina suggested as the vehicle zoomed closer. "Uh-huh." Darius took out his canister. She put her rifle to her shoulder and stepped in front of her brother. For some reason, Darius's cloak didn't seem to be working, and they couldn't run from their attackers. They would never reach the forest in time before being mowed down. All they could hope was that he could transport them before someone was hit. The guard fired, and the round narrowly missed Parthenia. Carina returned fire, winging the man who had shot at them. As he buckled, the vehicle veered, and the man behind him began to shoot. Bryce was firing now, and so was Parthenia. Carina pressed the trigger again, and a second guard went down. A shriek! Parthenia had been hit. The car was only meters away. The man in front glared and grinned maniacally as he screamed orders at his men. Carina's finger froze on her trigger. Her rifle spurted rounds, all going astray. As she stared at the man, sound seemed to disappear from the world. Everything zipped from existence until it was only her and the grinning man, alone in the universe, eyes locked. Chapter 22. They were back at the beach. Parthenia was crying out in pain, but she was alive. She rolled on the sand, eyes tight shut, hands clasped to her shoulder. Darius fell to his knees and gulped elixir. How did this happen? Carina wondered aloud. How the hell could they see us? Poor Parthenia. It was the second time she'd been wounded. The heal cast would quickly take away her pain, but that didn't make the wound hurt less at first. And Xiao had been attacked too. They were lucky no one had been killed. Darius had transported them to a spot at the edge of the waves. A little way along the shore, the shuttle stood in the shade of the trees. Bibic would notice them soon and come out to check on Parthenia, no doubt. What to do next? Return to the Bathsheba? She walked to the water's edge and watched the ocean, her mind a blank. She was still coming to grips with her vision of the man riding in the front of the vehicle. The face of the woman in the mountain hideaway flashed up. Suddenly, everything slotted into place. Bryce joined her and quietly asked,
"Is it possible the cloak cast didn't work?"
"No way. It's always worked before, and we were standing together. No one should have been able to see us."
"Maybe there's something about that place that makes casts ineffective. Nice shots back there, by the way."
"Thanks. Target practice helps to pass the time when spending years travelling the galaxy."
"You worked out a lot too, as I recall."
It was true, though he didn't know why, and she'd never told him. One of the last things Atoy had said before the Regians took her had been,
"You're weak. You can be stronger, and you need to be to protect those brats."
Bryce's focus had switched from her face to something behind her.
"Damn!"
"What?"
His eyes narrowed. "Soldiers! Hostiles in the trees!"
She swiveled. Shapes moved in the undergrowth, men and women in fatigues. She sipped elixir. There was no time to warn Darius or Parthenia. A pulse round flashed past and hit a wave, bursting the water into a hissing frenzy. Fighting the urge to run, she closed her eyes and cast. A second round impacted a wave. She had transported everyone hundreds of meters along the beach. This time they stood at the border of the jungle. Would the soldiers they'd left behind spot the shuttle? She hoped not, and that Bibic had the good sense to check the area before coming out. "What was that about?" asked Parthenia, putting a hand to her forehead. "They found us somehow. I had to move us away." "But how did they know where we were?" "I don't know. I just had to do something fast." "You should have transported us into the shuttle." "You're right. I didn't have time to think." In truth, she remained dazed with shock. "I'll transport us there now, and we can get the hell out of here." The mission felt like another failure, despite her recent revelation. If anything, it had only stacked the challenges higher. "Do they know where the shuttle is? Is that the reason they found us? Has anyone tried to con Bibic?"
"I haven't," said Darius. "But that can't be why they knew where we were. In the mountains it was different. There were hardly any places to land a shuttle. They could guess our rough location, but this beach stretches for tens of kilometers." "I don't believe it!" Bryce exclaimed. "They found us again!"
"The soldiers were only meters away." "That's not possible!" Carina protested. The enemy had appeared out of nowhere. There was no time to transport. "Scatter!" she yelled. "When you get a chance to cast, rendezvous in the shuttle." She grabbed Bryce's arm. "Stick with me!" By splitting up, they would stand a better chance of not being caught, and in the dense forest they might find a spot to hide long enough to cast. But she couldn't lose Bryce. Alone, he was all but helpless. She dashed into the trees. Instantly, the undergrowth seemed to grip her, intent on slowing her down. Tree trunks appeared and she raced around them, forcing through ferns and clinging vines, listening for Bryce as he ran behind her. The dreadful humidity descended again and sweat trickled from her face and armpits. Her lungs laboured. Where were the soldiers? Had she escaped them? The noise of her and Bryce's passage through the vegetation would be easy to follow. She could only count on their head start and greater speed to give her the breathing space to cast. Checking behind her, she spotted Bryce a few steps to her rear and beyond him approaching soldiers. She ran on. Why hadn't the cloak cast worked? How had the soldiers found them twice in a row, in less than a minute? The only way they could be found so easily would be if a mage was locating them, but that was impossible. He or she would need a personal item, something imbued with their essence, to track them down in that shadowy otherworld only mages could see. Yet they'd left nothing behind on their visits to Earth. A bamboo thicket rose up, tall and forbidding. The smooth stalks clustered thickly, but with a little effort. "Let's go in here." She eased between the stems, pulling Bryce in after her.
"We won't be able to move."
"Yes, we will. Better than someone in armour, anyway." She forced a hip into a gap and shouldered the vegetation apart, working her way deeper in. The bamboo was a trap, in a sense, but it would give them the time she needed. In half a minute, they were entirely hidden. She took out her canister. There was a flash. A soldier had fired at the clump, despite the fact they had no visible target. Smoke billowed up. Leaves at the top of the bamboo stalks turned into flames.
"Carina,"
Bryce whispered urgently.
"you'd better transport us, fast."
She gulped elixir, but before she could cast, the answer to the puzzle exploded in her mind. She had left things behind. In the detention centre in Bridgeford, she had been ordered to remove everything from her pockets. She had been carrying items she could use to locate her brother and sister if they were split up. Someone, she was in no doubt exactly who, had recently gotten hold of those things, and now he could cast to find her, Parthenia and Darius at any time.
"Carina,"
Bryce urged.
"why are we still here?"
The vegetation crackled as the fire moved closer. Hot air warmed her skin. "We can't go to the shuttle. He'll find us."
Who'll find us?"
She had to warn Parthenia and Darius of the danger. Rather than transporting, she sent. Her sister and brother were disbelieving, but there was no time to argue. She told them her plan. As she finished, she felt Bryce grab her jacket. He thrust her deeper into the bamboo, driving a passage through reluctantly yielding stalks. The fire had moved closer amazingly fast. A red haze of sparks and flying embers rose behind Bryce. She could smell singed hair. His eyes were wide and desperate as he tried to protect her from the flames. She drank elixir. The problem was she couldn't transport each of them to two different places at once. Bryce had to return to the shuttle first, and she didn't have time to explain why. As the air became unbearably hot and her chest heaved, she made the cast. Bryce was gone. She had saved him, or at least delayed his capture. Now to save herself and deprive their enemy of his advantage. The fire was almost upon her. She gulped elixir, but she choked on it. Precious fluid erupted from her mouth. At the same time, she dropped her canister. She picked it up and coughed. The smoke made it impossible to breathe. She had to cast or she would die. The heat on her skin was unbearable. Her jacket was smouldering. Lifting her canister to her lips once more, she saw blisters on the back of her hands. She wouldn't need to close her eyes, they were already swelling shut. She tipped up the container, but only a few drops dribbled into her mouth. The elixir must have spilled out. The bamboo at her back was impenetrable. To her front was an inferno. There was no escape. If only she could send to Bryce or any of her brothers and sisters. Whispering a last goodbye, she waited for the fire to take her. Chapter 23. The heat was gone. No flames crackled. She could breathe again, and the air was blissfully cool. Her canister was wrenched from her hand. It hit the ground with a thump.
"Shall I restrain her, Lord?"
Lord? Her eyes hadn't been playing tricks on her at the shuttle landing site. Only he would award himself such a ridiculous, highfalutin title.
No need. Look at the state of her. And without elixir, she's useless.
She felt a shadow block out the sunlight, and a voice hissed in her ear.
You are useless, aren't you, Carina? Not so clever without your little stage prop. Bringing the great mage to her knees is pathetically easy.
Forcing her eyes open a slit, she beheld the man she'd seen in the vehicle giving orders. He'd located them at the site, despite Darius's cloak. Clearly it didn't shield from casts. They'd never tested that capability. Then after they'd transported to the beach, he'd located them again and sent his soldiers in to capture or kill them. Transporting hundreds of meters away had made no difference at all. Another cast, and once more he had found them. Finally, as soon as she'd stayed in one spot long enough, he'd managed to first locate her and then transport her to his side. He was older than she remembered him, much older. He'd aged so much he was barely recognizable, hence her shock and doubt. But it explained why the woman in the mountain caves resembled Ma, and why the entire planet seemed to be prepared for their arrival, set up to prevent her from achieving her goal of a peaceful life for her family.
Castiel.
Her voice was a mere croak.
You do recognize me then?
He smirked.
I was wondering how long it would take until the penny dropped. Or I would have the pleasure of informing you myself.
He had to be late middle age, if not older. His thick black hair had thinned to grey strands. The youthful visage of a mid-teens boy had creased into lines and wrinkles. Eyes that had once been round and deep brown were hooded and filmy. How long had he travelled the galaxy? And how had he found Earth's coordinates? She had taken the mage documents from the castle on Ostalon. He'd never even set eyes on them.
Your little burnt face is alive with questions, he teased.
I do have questions, she murmured, but I'm not sure if you'll answer them. His eyes brightened with pleasure. He was enjoying himself. He must have anticipated this moment for decades, brooding over the revenge he would exact on his siblings for a childhood spent feeling inferior. His spitefulness made him weak. It was a weakness she could exploit, a weakness she had to exploit. Though her view of her surrounds was limited, Parthenia and Darius didn't seem to be here. She had to prevent him from doing the same to them as he had to her. She had to go through with her plan, albeit somewhat modified.
Try me, he gloated. Oh, and don't think I don't know what you're doing. You want to distract me so Parthenia and Darius have time to get away. Perhaps they might, but one way or another, it doesn't matter. I can always locate them again.
He held up a fist. Parthenia's brooch and one of Darius's combs peeked from between his fingers.
What's more, I have you, and they'll do anything to save you, as will Fern and Oriana. Such are the bonds of familial love, as my dear father knew so well. All I have to do is threaten to hurt you, and they'll come running, falling over themselves in their efforts to protect you. I will enjoy destroying all of you, one by one, including Nala and your oafish boyfriend. How odd you're still with him. But, as they say, love is blind.
He leaned so close his face took up all her vision.
I can read your mind. I know what question burns at its centre right now. You want to know how I arrived here ahead of you.
He grinned and sat back on his heels.
For so many years, I've anticipated informing you about what happened after you dumped me on Ostalon.
When you betrayed us to Sable Dirksen, you mean? Her voice sounded stronger. The effects of the fire were easing. She could breathe better, and didn't feel so weak, though her seared skin stung painfully.
Betrayed is such a strong word. I prefer to see my actions as sensible and rational. Had I remained with Sable, I would have eventually gained control of the Dirksen clan, vanquished the Shurers once and for all, and taken my rightful place as supreme leader in our sector.
Sable would have chewed you up and spat you out. Aren't you a bit old for all this? Clinging to the past isn't healthy.
I believe you were the one who wanted to know what happened back then.
She didn't answer, playing for time. After a pause, he seemed to conclude he'd scored a point.
You ruined my chances of success with the Dirksens, and the Shurers only ever saw me as their slave. The sector was dead to me.
She had a strong feeling Castiel had ruined his own chances with the Dirksens, assuming he'd ever had any, but she remained quiet. He was on a roll.
I decided to pay you back in kind. Why should you achieve your dream when I could not? However, I didn't anticipate arriving before you. What kept you?
Before she could reply, he added,
It was a rhetorical question. You remember Justin, Jace's brother?
She blinked, slowly and painfully. How had Castiel known about the Mage brothers? She and the black dogs had taken Jace from his cell in the mountain castle, where Sable Dirksen had left him to starve to death, and the last time she'd seen Justin, a member of the Mage Council, had been on Pyrene. She didn't know what had happened to him after the Dirksens had burned the matching campsite. She had assumed he'd escaped along with most of the other mages.
You do remember him. I can tell.
Her heart quailed at what she was about to hear.
If you hurt him, you'll do what? This may come as a surprise, but you aren't in any position to make threats. You see, I did hurt him, rather a lot. But that was after he gave away his secrets to Key. The commander is a master interrogator. I don't mind admitting it. We became reasonably good friends on our long voyage. I can see you're becoming confused, so I'll start at the beginning.
It was not confusion, but compassion that was troubling her. Compassion for the kind, wise man who had suffered at her evil half-brother's hands, and regret that he'd been dragged into her business and paid the price for it.
After you abandoned me and set off on your great adventure,
he made air quotes with his fingers.
Key returned to Ostalon. He knew from the Dirksens that I remained on the planet, and he sought me out to find a way to rescue Sable. Only a mage knows what another mage can do. The poor man was deeply in love with her, and prepared to stop at nothing to get her back safe and sound. But when word arrived from one of the mercenaries who resigned from your band that Sable was dead, his plan changed. He wanted nothing more than to make her executioner pay for the misdeed. He would do whatever it took to achieve his aim, and believe me, when Key wants something, he gets it. You and the rest of the mages might have departed Ostalon, but several had been captured on Pyrene, Justin among them. I won't bore you with the details, but Key wanted to help me follow you to Earth. Our desires dovetailed nicely. All we had to do was to wait for you to arrive, and here we are.
So Justin had known Earth's true coordinates all along? She had never even thought to ask a member of the council. But then again, she hadn't even known there was a council until she'd gone to Pyrene. She had another pressing question. The woman at the ancient mage's hideaway in the mountains, she's your daughter? He grimaced.
Letitia bears an unfortunate resemblance to our dear departed mother. I'm not surprised you understand now who she must be.
Letitia? What a pretty name. You must love her very much. She was being sarcastic. Castiel was incapable of loving anyone except himself. His grimace deepened.
She's useful. She's a mage, as you must have noticed, and not a bad one. Due to Mother's neglect of my education, I couldn't teach her myself, but the mages here have done a reasonable job.
So there were more mages on Earth, and Castiel was in contact with them. Was he also controlling them? Did they know he was a dark mage? There was so much more she was dying to find out, but she had to act soon. He might grow bored of delighting in her downfall, and then he would seek out Parthenia and Darius. They could have already left on the shuttle, but she doubted it. They were, as Castiel had said, loyal to a fault. She had to think of something to distract him, put him off his guard. What better distraction was there to a narcissist than to get him to talk about himself? You're an old man. Isn't devoting your entire life to getting back at me a little excessive? You must have better things to do.
Don't flatter yourself. I've done plenty during my sojourn on Earth. Plenty. Dealing with you and the sad wastes of space who are our siblings is merely a pastime. I will take great pleasure in introducing you to my empire before deciding whether to...
She thrust a hand upward and fastened it around his throat. The simple movement sent waves of agony down her arm, but she squeezed hard, sealing off his voice and breathing. Castiel flailed, attracting the attention of his men. But before they could reach her, she threw him on his back. Snatching the flask at his side, she ducked a rifle butt aimed at her head. No one was firing. As she had hoped, they didn't want to risk a shot while she was so close to their lord. Tearing the lid from the flask, she swigged elixir and tossed the container aside. At the same time, hands grabbed her shoulders and wrenched her to her feet. But she'd snatched Castiel's weapon from its holster. She aimed it at him. "Release me, or he's dead!" The hands left her. Maintaining her aim, she quickly scooped up the items Castiel had been holding, which had fallen from his grasp. In her hand were Parthenia's brooch, Darius's comb, and a button that must have been torn from her jacket during the struggle in the detention centre in Bridgeford. She stared at her half-brother, sprawled on the ground. She had a short window of time while the elixir she had swallowed would retain its effect. What's it to be, Castiel? Transport for me or split for you? The arrogant confidence in his eyes wavered.
You won't do it. You wouldn't dare. Your own death would follow mine in an instant.
But terror underlay his words. They'd both witnessed his father's horrible demise at Mars' hands. The satisfaction of knowing I'd removed you from the universe might be worth it. She closed her eyes.
You don't have the guts to kill me, Carina Lin. Run back to our brothers and sisters if you like. I'm enjoying our game of cat and mouse, but I'll also enjoy bringing it to its inevitable conclusion.
Chapter 24. Bryce was seriously pissed off. He hadn't spoken a word to Carina the entire shuttle ride back to the ship, and he'd maintained his silence in the hours afterward, while she and her siblings came to grips with the fact that Castiel had re-entered their lives. Bryce was the type of person to stew a while before voicing his grievance, so she left him to it. Nothing she could say would make a difference to how he felt anyway. He was right to be angry. If the roles had been reversed, she would have been angry too. Yet what she had done was also right. She hadn't had a choice about it. He waited until they were alone in their cabin before saying, "We need to talk." She heaved a sigh. "I know." Sitting next to him on their bed, she took his hand. "I know what you're going to say, but..." He removed his hand from her grasp.
You can't do that to me again, ever. If you do, I don't think our relationship can stand it."
She took a breath. She knew he was upset, but not this upset. "Bryce, there was no time to explain or discuss it. I had to get you to safety, and I had to find Castiel. If I hadn't, we would have forever been at risk of him locating and transporting Parthenia, Darius, and me. The only reason he didn't do it immediately was because we kept moving. He couldn't get a lock on us. As soon as he could, when you and I were hiding in the bamboo, he captured me, and I couldn't take you with me because—" Her words petered out. Bryce's lips had thinned to a line, and he'd turned pale. The anger he was holding back dismayed her.
"Because?"
"Because it would have complicated things. If both of us had gone to Castiel, he would have used you to force me to do whatever he wanted. He would have threatened to kill you. And then what else could I do except obey? You know what it was like with his father. Castiel learned all of Stefan Schurer's tricks."
"So you're saying I'm a liability? That I couldn't have helped you? That I'm incapable?"
"No!" She covered her face with her hands. "You don't understand."
"I think I do. You wanted to play the hero again."
"That isn't true, and it's not fair. Do you really think I'm so crazy I would risk burning to death just to inflate my ego? You saw how I was before Parthenia healed me. Do you think I nearly died for fun?" She hadn't told him, or anyone else, that she would have died if Castiel hadn't transported her out of the bamboo. No one knew she'd spilled the remains of her elixir. It had seemed an unnecessary detail. Now she didn't think she would ever reveal the truth, not if this was Bryce's reaction without that tidbit.
"No, not for fun. But the first thing you thought was you had to get me out of the way before tackling the problem yourself, because you're the only one who could do it."
"That's ridiculous. I'm sorry you're hurt, but let's not pussyfoot around the facts. I was the only one who could do it. Out of the two of us, who can cast, huh?" Perhaps her abilities did emasculate him, but she couldn't help it. She couldn't deny who she was.
"Wow, that's some apology. Thanks. I feel much better."
"I'm not trying to make you feel better. I'm trying to make you see sense. There wasn't anything else I could do in the circumstances except exactly what I did. If I hadn't transported you to the shuttle and gone after Castiel, we would probably all be dead right now, Bibic included. Castiel would have located Darius and Parthenia in the shuttle and discovered where it was. We were lucky he didn't spot us when we first landed. I guess he wasn't casting for us then. He can't do it all the time, or it would exhaust him. We would be dead or captured, and then he would have enticed Fern and Oriana to the surface.
"For fuck's sake, Carina, I get it."
Bryce rose to his feet and leaned over her, fists clenched.
"Do you think I can live with your family for years and not understand how it works? I was there when Stefan Schurer kidnapped you. I was there when you escaped the Nightfall. I've been there, right by your side, all the time. I left my family to help yours. I gave up my future on Ithia. I've risked my life again and again to help you. Have you forgotten all that? Or do you only see me as a pathetic hanger-on, tagging along because I don't have anything better to do? Or perhaps I'm just a lovesick nobody with no life of their own."
She looked up at him, tears pooling in her eyes. She swallowed. "No, I don't think any of that. I love you."
"Do you really? Is that what love is? Ignoring my wishes, riding roughshod over my free will, transporting me wherever you want, whenever you feel like it? What else have you done? Have you enthralled me like you did Parthenia? Did you do a little interrogation late at night while I was too sleepy to notice? Or maybe you got me to agree to something against my will. That's a funny kind of love."
"I've never enthralled you."
How would I know? How can I trust you when you just transport me out of a situation without a by your leave?
There wasn't time for anything else. How can you expect me to ignore the dangers and not do what's needed to save your life, just so you don't feel controlled? She reached out and touched his arm. He didn't pull it away, to her great relief. I can guess how it must feel, and if anything, I would be even angrier. Of the two of us, I am the one with the bigger ego, I admit. He didn't react, ignoring her attempt to make eye contact. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. We're different. I can do things you can't. And if I and my siblings couldn't cast, we wouldn't have made it this far.
If you and your family couldn't cast, we wouldn't even be here.
It was an undeniable truth. The blessing and curse of their abilities was what had prompted her to drag everyone halfway across the galaxy. The only reason we met was because I'm a mage. I was on Ithia to find Darius and try to make contact with a mage family. Bryce sat down beside her, his shoulders high and his head low, as he rested his elbows on his knees.
I guess that's right. If you weren't who you are, we wouldn't be together.
A scene from a while ago returned to her mind, when they'd been in the Twilight Dome, and she'd asked him if he had any regrets. He'd said he hadn't. Was that still true? She didn't dare ask him. Perhaps he was concluding he'd made a mistake. I don't know if I can promise to never cast on you again without your permission in a life and death situation. I love you. The practical part of her mind protested. Of course she should save him if it came down to it. She would want him to save her. Yet she empathized with his reaction to what she'd done. For once, she managed to not speak the quiet part out loud. He took her hand in his, but his focus remained downward. Gently, he rubbed it.
I don't know how to make things better either. Maybe we can't.
She stiffened, dreading what might follow.
It's funny. I love that you're a mage. I love that about you. Though I think I would love you just the same if you weren't. But it means we aren't equals, and nothing can change that. Maybe that's something I've been trying to ignore for too long.
He released her hand and stood up, continuing to not meet her gaze.
I need time to think. I'm going to sleep elsewhere for a while.
No, don't. Let's talk some more. We can find a way through this.
You're not hearing me. Again.
She was silent. Before he left, he said,
What happened today? That's why ordinary people hate mages. You make us feel useless. If you want to live safely on Earth, you'll have to figure out a way to fix that problem.
Chapter 25. After hours of tossing and turning, Carina was finally falling asleep when she felt the ship move. It wasn't easy to feel the motion of a behemoth like the Bathsheba, but she'd spent so long aboard her she'd become sensitive to any deviation from the norm. She combed the bridge, but received no answer. She tried Xiao instead. The pilot probably had a good reason for changing their position, but it would have been nice to be consulted. Xiao also ignored her comm. As the movement continued, Carina grew alarmed. Was someone else moving the ship? In her sleepy state, she wondered if enemies had boarded and everyone except her had been taken prisoner. It was a wild thought, but no other explanation sprang immediately to mind. She couldn't check if Bryce knew what was happening, not after their argument and his request for her to leave him alone. She commed Parthenia. To her relief, her sister answered quickly. "What's wrong? I was sound asleep." "You're okay?" "Of course I'm okay." "Is Bibic with you?" "Yes, why?" "Have you noticed the ship's moving?" "No, she..." "Oh, you're right, she is. How odd." Carina cut the comm. If Bibic wasn't flying the Bathsheba, it had to be Shao, or perhaps a trainee pilot. Maybe that was the explanation, but it was risky to practice manoeuvres in the current situation. One thing she knew for sure, she wasn't going to get to sleep until she knew what was going on. She got out of bed, pulled on a robe, and walked to the bridge. Shao ducked her head as she walked in. Van Hasty was here, and so were Jackson, Rees, Mads, Burkan, Ola, and Pamuk. Even Chertang was present. He'd managed to give Cheapy the slip. "Well," Carina said, "isn't this quite the delegation? Is anyone going to tell me what's going on?" Everyone looked at Van Hasty, except Shao, who kept her gaze steadfastly ahead. "We decided to take matters into our own hands," Van Hasty said, a defiant look in her eye. "We?" Carina had a strong suspicion the merc had persuaded the others to gang together and back her up. "And that means?" Had the Black Dogs decided to give up the idea of settling on Earth and return across the galaxy? Jackson cleared his throat. "We're gonna take out that place your asshole little brother is running. One blast from the obliterator should do it, and take him out at the same time. Then your problems will be over and we can go planetside." That explained Chertang's presence. He was the weapons operator. "Are you all insane? Shao, stop the ship!" Shao looked at Van Hasty, who shook her head. "Shao," Carina repeated. "Do what I said. That's a direct order." "You're long past the stage of giving us orders, Lin," said Van Hasty. "You might have made corporal in the Black Dogs, but you were discharged a long time ago, and we're not even running your contract anymore. When was the last time you paid us?" "But you know why we're here. You agreed to help my family. You said I still had 6 days." 5 days. But it doesn't matter. Not now we figured out a faster way to do it. Your way isn't faster or better. It's stupid. If you blow up that site, it'll ruin everything. Not to mention the fact that you'll be killing hundreds, if not thousands, of innocent people. "Innocent?" Jackson's forehead creased into a quizzical frown. "You think those men and women working for your brother can't tell what an evil, traitorous shithole he is? But they're still working for him. Choose the wrong side and you get what's coming to you. That's what I say." His merc companions nodded their agreement. "Okay," Carina reasoned. "If you don't care about murdering Castiel's workers, think about the damage you'll do to our prospects on Earth. By all accounts, it's a peaceful place, as close to a harmonious society as you can get. How do you think unleashing the obliterator is going to go down? What kind of introduction is that? How will the people of Earth see us?" A puzzled look passed between the mercs. "Why should we care?" Van Hasty asked. "Because we want a new life, a different life, an end to all the violence and killing." "We do? First I heard about it," said Pamuk. "Yeah," Jackson growled. "I think you're getting confused, Lin. No one here signed up to the happy ever after scenario you have in mind. I can't speak for everyone, but what I'm looking forward to is getting wasted and seeing some different ugly mugs for a change. You're wanted for murder, in case you forgot." Jackson was another problem to be overcome. While Earth might be peaceful, on the surface, it was also technologically advanced. Jackson was known to the authorities. He wouldn't last 5 minutes, even in a small town, before being picked up. "Aren't you a little old to be getting wasted? Don't you want to settle down?" Another look passed between the dogs. This time it was incredulity. Jackson gave a great bark of laughter and doubled over, clutching his sides. His companions seemed to find her comment equally funny. The atmosphere in the bridge reverberated with their whoops and giggles, until finally Jackson pulled himself together sufficiently to squeeze out, "Good one, Lin." The Bathsheba had to be nearly out of the moon's cover. Soon she would be visible to anyone on Earth who happened to have a telescope pointing in the right direction. Perhaps whoever had covered up the movements of the spy space vessel would do the same for the colony ship. But she didn't want to take the risk. "Shao, please, stop the ship!" The pilot shrugged helplessly. "It's 7 against 1. Sorry." "Chertang!" Carina appealed to the pickup from Lakshmi Station. "You could refuse to fire. Then we might as well stay behind the moon." "Someone else could do it. And besides, Van Hasty's promised she'll get Cheapy off my back." "You would kill hundreds of people just to get rid of a nagging ex-girlfriend?" "Like I said, if I don't do it, someone else will. And she's really annoying." The mercs nodded vigorously. Carina opened a comm. "Darius?" He was still awake, probably playing games on his interface. "Hi, Carina. You're up late. Could you cloak the ship? I'll explain why later." "Oh, sure." "A waste of time," Van Hasty commented as Carina closed the comm. "They'll know our position as soon as we fire." "We're not firing." How could she make them see sense? It wasn't only her family's happiness at stake. The hilarity the mercs had expressed at the idea of living out the rest of their lives as ordinary, law-abiding citizens wasn't shared by them all. It wasn't hard to keep track of general opinion in the closed confines of a starship, and her impression was that most of the passengers were hoping to integrate into Earth society and finally begin living normal lives. The bunch of dogs on the bridge were diehards, holding on to their military mindsets. Were their old habits also responsible for their decision to wreak havoc on Earth? Maybe it was only that, after a long monotonous voyage, they were simply itching for a fight. The ship had to be entirely out from the moon's cover, and Darius's cloak wouldn't last forever. "You can't do this! We came here to start a new life, a better life." Van Hasty shook her head. "You were always a dreamer, Lin. People don't change. Humans have always killed each other, and they always will. That's why we have to swing first. It might not seem like it, but we're doing you a favour. If we wait around and play nice, your brother's gonna be here soon enough to wipe us out." Chertang asked. "Should I start the power-up sequence?" "Yeah, do it." Carina tried to think of a way to stop them, but she was out of arguments. And Shao was right. It was 7 against 1. She couldn't force them to stop. Her fingers bit into her palms as the Bathsheba slowly built up speed on her journey to Earth orbit. "Please, don't do this." Jackson patted her on the shoulder. "In a day or so you'll be thanking us." The bridge door slid open. Bryce had arrived. He walked in, rubbing his eyes. "What's going on? Where are we going? And why's the bridge comm dead?" He didn't seem surprised to see her, but neither did he acknowledge her presence. Van Hasty quickly outlined the plan. "But isn't that going to screw everything up?" "That's what I've been trying to tell them." "Don't worry," said Jackson. "We've got everything in hand." Bryce frowned. No. That isn't going to work. Carina's got the right idea. You have to play this carefully. Earth's different from other planets. You can't go in there guns blazing, not if you want to live there long term." "Yeah, about that," Jackson replied. "I can't say I've spent a lot of time down there, but from what I could tell and what I've heard, Earth seems pretty boring. It won't hurt to shake things up a little." "But that isn't what Carina wants." Pamuk gave a derisive puffed. "Who gives a shit?" adding, "Sorry, but you know what I mean." "I do, and so does her family, and more than half this ship, I bet, including the Marchonish women. They want to follow her lead and take things slow and easy. That's why you cut the bridge comm, right? So you could act unilaterally. Then, when the deed's done, everyone has to join the battle. Better to ask forgiveness than permission, yeah?" The less outspoken mercs began to look uncomfortable. Jackson's expression was pensive, but Van Hasty remained defiant. "Who the hell are you to lecture us? You're not even a black dog." "Maybe not, but Carina was, and she deserves your loyalty. I thought that's what the dogs were about. I thought you guys supported each other. Even if you don't think she's going about this the right way, you should give her a chance." "She's had a chance, and we don't owe her anything." "Yes, you do. You all owe her your lives." "If you're talking about all the shit that's gone down after Cadwallader accepted her miserable assignment..." "I'm not. I'm talking about before then." He turned to Carina. "You never told them, did you?" She actually didn't know what he was referring to, but she didn't want to let on. Not now he seemed to be getting through to the mercs. "No, I never did." "It was just before the mission to rescue Darius from the Dirksons," Bryce continued to them. "You were supposed to be protecting an embassy, only your old boss had signed you up to a bum deal. The enemy had far greater numbers, and you were going to be massacred." She remembered now, though she didn't recall telling Bryce about it. The event must have come up in one of their many conversations about their pasts. It had been the first time she'd been forced to make a cast while on duty that couldn't be easily explained away. Jackson's eyes widened as he stared at her. "That was you?" During the embassy siege, when it had become clear all the mercs were about to die if she didn't do something drastic, she had transported the enemy soldiers a fair distance away, giving the dogs time to escape. "You mean when..." Van Hasty's shoulders slumped. "I was pinned down, no way out, toast. Then the hostiles were gone, vanished. I couldn't believe it. All these years, and I never put two and two together. How dumb is that? Did Cadwallader know?" "He figured it out after I'd hired the dogs to help me on Ostalon, and I had to explain to him what I can do. Captain Speedle knew, though. I had to tell him I was a mage to explain how I knew Darius's location." "I remember Speedle," said Rees. "Good guy." Pamuk said, "I was there at the embassy. Got wounded. A medic told me I nearly bled out. Damn." Silence filled the room. After a few moments, Shao said, "Shall I, return the ship to her previous position?" "Yeah," Van Hasty answered grudgingly. The mercs began to file out. Chertang got up from his seat and trotted up to Van Hasty. "We still have a deal, right?" Carina thanked Bryce. He didn't answer, only gave her a pained look as he left. Chertang still at her heels, Van Hasty was the last to depart the bridge. Before the door closed behind her, she said, 5 days. Chapter 26. Officer Matt was missing. Apparently no one had given him an earcom, and his cabin assignment didn't appear on the manifest. In a ship as vast as the Bathsheba, it was going to be hard to track him down. Carina had tried the places she might expect to find him, the Twilight Dome, all the refectories, gyms, and various entertainment centres, but he wasn't in any of them. Asking around, she discovered that in his short time on the ship, he'd become well known and well liked, though she got the impression most of the passengers thought he was a little crazy. That was probably due to his belief that everything around him was part of a gigantic hoax, but no one had seen him since the previous active shift. She cast her mind back to the last time she'd seen the man from Earth. It had been at the debriefing Van Hasty and Jackson had crashed, along with Ava. Ava had taken Matt with her when she left, telling him she would find him a cabin. Carina calmed the Marchonish woman, but she didn't answer. Why does everything have to be so hard? She checked with the sickbay staff. Ava's shift didn't start for several hours. Cursing, she set off for the woman's abode. The Marchonish women had taken over a small section of the living quarters. Understandably, after their experiences at the hands of their planet's menfolk, they'd been nervous around the mercs, who were mostly male, burly and loud. The men had also avoided the women, not knowing how to treat them. They were used to female mercs, who were clear and often physical in their rebukes if a guy tried to take things further than they wanted. Over time, some of the men had learned how to be quieter and gentler and to listen a bit better, and relationships between black dogs and the newcomers had formed. The Marchonish women's section had begun to empty somewhat as couples moved into double cabins in other areas, but a few of the women remained, including Ava. Carina guessed her friends helped her out with childcare while she worked. She rang the door chime. After waiting a minute, she rang the chime again. Perhaps Ava was deeply asleep and her comms alert hadn't woken her. Carina felt a bit bad waking her up, but this matter couldn't wait. The door slid open, but only part of the way. Ava was tousle-haired, flushed, and wearing a bathrobe. "Hi, Carina. I didn't expect to see you here. Sorry to wake you. I'm looking for Matt. Do you remember which cabin he was assigned?" "Oh." Ava's flush deepened. "Why do you want him? Is it urgent?" "Yes, very." "Well," she looked over her shoulder and then back at Carina, her face deep red. A male voice within the room murmured something. "Shit!" Carina internally groaned. "I'm really sorry to disturb you. I'll give you a minute." "Thanks." The door closed. Leaning her back on the bulkhead, she rolled her eyes. She's only known him a week or so. When those Marchonish women set their sights on someone, they moved fast. Matt appeared, buttoning his shirt. He looked mildly abashed, but not to Ava's level. "You want me for something?" "I do, but..." She peeked in the cabin. Ava was tidying her bedding. She called out to her. "Could I speak to you too?" After another minute, she came out dressed. "Sorry about this," Carina said awkwardly, "but I'm glad you seem to be settling in, Matt." "Thanks. I like Ava, but nothing's changed. You're holding an officer of the law against his will, which is a serious crime, though I guess you could plead insanity." She turned to Ava. "He still believes this isn't real?" "I've tried to explain, but nothing I say seems to convince him." He placed a hand on her arm. "I believe that you believe it. That's all that matters. I don't think you're deliberately lying." Ava looked at Carina appealingly, but she didn't know how to convince him either. When a place was so technologically advanced, anything could be faked. It became impossible to tell reality from fiction. She took them to a small out-of-the-way room with a beverage machine. As she had hoped, it was empty. When everyone was settled, she began. "Matt, I need information about Earth. Information we can't get through regular channels. Something strange is going on down there, and I have to find out exactly what's happening. If I can't, it's going to make everything much harder for my family, and maybe everyone else on this ship, Ava included. Things could be very dangerous for us if we try to settle on the planet." He smiled indulgently. "Whatever you want to ask me, go ahead. But I warn you, I'm just an ordinary guy. I don't have access to classified information." He was humouring her, but there was no reason he had to believe the Bathsheba was a real starship, or that her passengers were from other planets in order to answer her questions. Setting your conclusion this is all a hoax aside, hypothetically, if people arrived from outer space decades ago and infiltrated Earth's governments, how would someone go about addressing it? Who would they approach? His eyebrows lifted. "This is worse than I thought. You seriously think all the governments are corrupt?" "Not necessarily corrupt, but compromised. You see, mages have the ability to influence others' behavior and decisions. A mage could persuade key people to erase data, ignore information, replace files with false ones, and they wouldn't even remember they were doing it. An evil mage, working with others, could exert a lot of control over Earth's population.
"That's a pretty powerful spell you have there,"
Matt replied, chuckling. Carina's jaw muscle twitched. "It's not a..." Ava shrugged. Carina took a breath and started again. "I know you don't believe me, but can you put your doubts aside just for a second and think hard? I need your help. Earth needs your help. Imagine what I'm saying might be true. As a police officer, you have a duty to protect people and to bring lawmakers to justice, don't you?" He put the mug down before replying, "If what you're saying were true, I still couldn't help you. These mages, as you call them, could be anywhere and everywhere, casting spells left, right and centre, tricking government officials into thinking black is white. If that was really happening, how could anyone stop them? As soon as they tried, or they were caught snooping or whatever, the mage would only have to get into their head and change what they thought. Or," he waggled his fingers, "make them disappear in a puff of smoke." "We can't change what others think, not in the long term." "Then disappearing people seems more likely. Whatever, it's moot. You're insane, and the sooner you let me go, the better." He turned to Ava. "I'll make sure nothing bad happens to you. You're a victim here." "I really do come from a distant star system, you know." "Of course you do." He put an arm around her and kissed her cheek. Then he said to Carina, "Is there anything else you want to speak to me about?" "No, you can go." Matt and Ava left, holding hands. Chapter 28. The 5 days Van Hasty had reminded Carina of had shrunk to 4, with no sign of a solution to her problems. Parthenia came to see her. "What's wrong with Bryce?" she asked as she stepped into the cabin. That was the great thing about siblings. They didn't bother with social niceties. "Hi," Carina replied. "I'm doing fine. How are you?" "There's no need to be snippy. He's been walking around with his sad puppy look for 2 days. Have you two been fighting?" She glanced around the room. "Is he even sleeping here?" "He's taking some time away from me to think." Parthenia sank onto the sofa. "That bad, huh? What did you fight about?" "It isn't important. Mage and non-mage relationships are hard." "I'm not sure that's true. Bibic and I get along fine, and so do Fern and his endless stream of girlfriends." "Don't exaggerate. He's only on his 3rd, which isn't bad going, considering the limited pool of candidates. Anyway, he always breaks up with them amicably. Maybe it's because he grew up so close to Oriana. So it's just me who's the difficult one. Thanks. That makes me feel a whole lot better." "I'm just saying." Parthenia took another look around the cabin. "It will be nice to leave this place, don't you think? I mean, in many ways the Bathsheba is our home, but I would love to live in a house and be able to step outside to feel the sun on my skin." "Me too," Carina replied glumly. "At the moment I can't see how that's going to happen. Castiel has made Earth out of bounds, and he's fixed things so the entire population is on the lookout for us. Even if we hid ourselves away somewhere remote, I'm sure he would find us in the end. And if Castiel didn't, Commander Key would. That man's a machine. How was I to know when I executed Sable Dirksen I was killing the love of his life?" You didn't tell us about Key. I didn't know he was there too. He was the man who attempted to massacre the mages at the matching on Pyrene, right?" "That's him, though he would have been working under Sable's orders. I must have forgotten to tell you Castiel mentioned him. Our lovely brother had a lot to say. I had a feeling he'd been rehearsing his speech for years." You also didn't tell us that it was Castiel who got you out of that fire.
No, it wasn't.
Parthenia gave her a hard look.
All right, it was Castiel who transported me. I'd spilled my elixir.
I knew your story didn't make any sense. How could you have found him so easily? No one's that lucky. So if Castiel hadn't accidentally saved you, you would have died. Is that what's upsetting Bryce?
No, he doesn't know.
Don't tell him, Parthenia. She held up her hands. I'm certainly not going to interfere in your business. I'm only concerned about impediments to our settling on Earth. I understand now that not only Castiel stands in our way, we have to contend with this man Key. I don't know which is worse. Our brother is evil to the core, but Key is damned smart.
A formidable pair,
but Earth is vast. Surely we should be able to find somewhere to live, as long as we're careful.
As long as we skulk around, keep to the shadows, pretend we don't have our abilities. We didn't come all this way to live the same life we lived where we grew up. A half-life, always watching, always fearing discovery.
No, we didn't, but sometimes it's better to bend than break. If we can't live openly, we can still live, still take some pleasure in life. I'm tired of eating printed food, Carina. I'm sick of looking out at black, lonely space. All my adult years have been spent aboard a starship. I need something new. I need to live.
She swallowed and added, even if it means never casting again. You would give up who you are?
Being a mage isn't all I am,
Parthenia whispered and looked down. Tears dropped onto her hands, lying on her lap. Carina's sister had learned from a young age to suppress her true emotions. If she had worn her heart on her sleeve, her father would have known how much she hated him and loved her mother, drawing his wrath down on both of them. Covering up how she felt had become a habit. For her to be in this state meant she was near the end of her tether. Carina moved next to Parthenia and hugged her.
I'll find a way, don't worry. There has to be some kind of way, a compromise of some kind.
Maybe you're right. Maybe I've been going about this all wrong, butting heads and acting before thinking. She recalled the black dogs on the bridge and smiled wryly. Perhaps I'm more merc than mage. The door chime sounded. My, I'm popular today. Darius had come to see her too, with Nala. Parthenia quickly wiped away her tears as they walked in. Nala quipped brightly, "Are we having a family reunion?" "It looks like it," Carina replied. "I expect Fern and Oriana will be along any minute. Is this purely a social call, or do you want to see me about something in particular?" Nala sat next to Parthenia. "Isn't it obvious why we're here? We want to know when is the next trip to Earth. I would like to go this time. I'm the only one who hasn't been there yet. I've been reading all about it, but I haven't had a chance to set eyes on the place." Of all her siblings, Nala was the one Carina was most reluctant to take to Earth. Though she was bright as a button, she didn't have mage or military skills. The revelation that Castiel was there only increased Carina's reluctance. Castiel bore a special hatred for his youngest sister, possibly even greater than the hatred he harboured toward Carina. Nala had once been his biggest fan, but she'd switched sides, an act he would never forgive. "I don't want to return to Earth without a plan," said Carina, "and I'm all out of ideas. As Officer Matt pointed out to me a few hours ago, Castiel seems to have everyone with any influence on Earth under his control. He's discovered and enlisted mages there to his cause. They're all working for him. What can we do against hundreds, potentially thousands of mages?" "He's enlisted them to his cause?" Nala asked. "That doesn't sound like Castiel. He was never the persuasive type. He would have thought it beneath him." Carina frowned.
I'd just assumed. Believe me, I know our nasty brother better than anyone. I would be very surprised if Castiel has used diplomacy to recruit a workforce. That isn't his style. You're right. He must be controlling them somehow.
If we could find what he's doing,
Darius said,
maybe we could put a stop to it. Then Earth would be a friendlier place to us.
It would be a huge task, though, said Carina, and we wouldn't know where to start. We have no contacts. We don't know anyone down there who can help us discover how Castiel is exerting his control. If we reveal that we're from out system, we'll... She frowned again. We'll what? Parthenia asked. Are you thinking about the general alert? We do have friends down there, Carina blurted. There are people who will believe us. Ha! Nala grinned. You mean the Exodus testifiers? They would be ecstatic if planetary colonists turned up on their doorstep. It would prove they weren't cranks. They would be vindicated.
But wouldn't it put them in danger from Castiel? Asked Darius. He could kill anyone who associates with us.
Yes, we would have to be careful. We would have to let them know the stakes. Yet somehow she felt sure the testifiers would agree to help them. Chapter 28. The journalist who had written the article about the Exodus testifier was as unscrupulous as they come. It had taken little more than prompting and the promise of exclusive rights to a recording for him to give up the real name and address of his interviewee. What proved a lot harder was reaching the man. The address was many kilometres from the site where it had been safe to land the shuttle, and travelling by public transportation was out of the question. Not only was no one from the Bathsheba chipped, the surveillance systems would be primed to pick up Carina, Bryce and Darius's faces due to their arrest on the first visit to Earth. Neither did they dare risk transporting, and so they had to walk to the testifier's location. He lived a great distance from Officer Matt's little town, in a city on another continent, yet the place resembled their initial experience of Earth. No motorized traffic travelled the roads, only mechanical conveyances, and many people simply walked. Delivery bots trundled the pathways, carrying their loads to their destinations, ignored by pedestrians. Metro stations were everywhere. The subsurface had to be a honeycomb of tunnels. The ambient noise was minimal, only the chatter of voices, the clanks and clinks of bicycles and larger pedal-driven vehicles, and the faint hum of the bots. Trees and shrubs lined the streets. It seemed a plant grew in every available space, including the rooftops, which were a sea of long grasses. As they walked, Carina didn't spot anyone tending the vegetation. It appeared to have been planted, or perhaps grew naturally, to thrive in the local conditions. Nala spent most of their journey vacillating between open-mouthed wonder and childlike excitement. Bryce didn't speak to Carina as they walked, though not because he was punishing her. He wasn't like that. He was only melancholy. So was she. The end of their relationship seemed to be looming, and she didn't know a way to save it. Their fundamental differences had overcome them. Perhaps it was always this way with mages and non-mages in the end. "I like it here so much," said Oriana, trailing her hand over a flowering vine hanging from a house front. "It's so nice to be surrounded by green after living for years on a starship. And breathe the air. No faint sweatiness the filters can't scrub out." Fern halted. "This is it, number 68. Like most of the other houses they'd passed in this residential area of the Earth City, the Exodus testifiers was 2-story and had plants growing in pockets set into the front walls. The vegetation was unkempt, unlike many of the other homes. It was clear the householder wasn't interested in the upkeep of his vertical garden. In fact, the plants seemed to be weeds that had sprouted there opportunistically from blown-in seeds. "Do you think he'll offer us a drink?" asked Oriana. "I'm so thirsty. Perhaps I could ask him for one. Do you think he'll mind?" Carina exhaled, puffing out her lips. "Darius, are you getting anything? Anything we need to worry about?" He was best at sensing evilness emanating from another mage, such as his horrible eldest brother and the dark mage Way on Magog, but he also picked up on the internal life of non-mages. He closed his eyes and concentrated before replying, "I'm mostly getting Oriana, but very little from in there." Oriana's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, you're mostly getting me?" Hoping Darius's impression was a good sign, Carina pressed the chime. Grey-haired, mid-50s and well into middle-aged spread, the article had said, though the testifier's name was not John Markham, but Alfie Binger. The door opened, revealing a man fitting the description. He was even wearing a cardigan and slacks. "Sorry," Alfie said, his gaze quickly taking in the 6 people on his doorstep. "I'm not interested." As he closed the door, Carina shoved her foot in the gap. He looked down at the impediment preventing him from dismissing his unwelcome callers, and then up into her face. "We aren't selling anything," said Carina. "We want to talk to you about Exodus testifiers." His expression hardened. "In that case, I'm definitely not interested. Are you here because of the article? I did not give permission for that to be published. That man lied to me. Leave me alone. Move your foot or I'll call the police. We only want to talk to you for a few minutes. Let us in and we can explain." "Absolutely not. Stop pestering me and go away." "We're here because we want to be testifiers too," Oriana said brightly. "We've seen the evidence and we believe it. Please let us in. We've walked so far and I'm dreadfully thirsty." "You want to join the association?" Alfie asked suspiciously. "But you're foreigners." He pointed at their translators. "Join it in your own country." "We live here," said Carina. "We aren't reporters. Think about it. Why would a media station send 6 people to talk to you?" He looked from face to face and the tension seemed to go out of his body. "Okay, you can come in, but if I find out you're lying, I'm calling the police, and I'll press charges." Alfie Binger's home was as cluttered as the article had implied. Boxes and stacks of printed material stood on each side of his hall. The only available floor space was dedicated to a path 1 person wide. They followed him in single file to a lounge area, similarly filled with stuff. There was more variety here. As well as boxes and printed sheets, models of starships stood on every flat surface and hung from the ceiling. Pictures of starships and their crews in uniform, smiling, festooned the walls. The piles of rations the article had mentioned filled the sitting areas. "You're related, aren't you?" Alfie asked as he moved the ration packets onto the floor. "I can see the family resemblance." Straightening up, he added, looking at Bryce, "But not you. Are you the feisty one's boyfriend or something?" Carina was tempted to reply something, but she kept her comment to herself. "What can you tell us about the Exodus? We don't know much, and we were hoping you could fill us in." It seemed a safer opening gambit than immediately revealing the real reason for their visit. "Oh, before we start," said Oriana, "could I please have some water?" Fern tutted. Alfie's suspicion appeared to resurface. "All right, but you mustn't touch anything." Bryce was navigating obstacles in order to look more closely at the pictures on the walls. "Oriana, could you stop thinking about your own comfort for once?" Fern complained. "This is serious business." "Carina," said Bryce. "Look at this." Oriana replied to Fern. "How can I concentrate when my mouth is like your armpit?"
You have no idea what my armpit's like, Fern retorted.
Oh, shut up, said Nala. Both of you.
Carina,
Bryce repeated. Alfie returned with a glass of water, which he handed to Oriana. Thank you so much. She gulped it down. That's much better.
Please sit, said Alfie. Sit down, everyone.
They squeezed into the scant sitting space, except for Bryce, who remained at the wall, hands in pockets, as he scrutinized an image.
What do you already know about the Exodus? Alfie asked. I'm just asking because there's no point in me repeating anything to you.
Just the basics, Carina replied. That people used to leave Earth to colonize the stars. But we've forgotten about it, right? There isn't much evidence left. Do you know why? Alfie lifted his hands in a gesture of bewilderment.
Beats me, but the evidence is there for anyone who looks for it. I suppose the establishment doesn't like having its views challenged.
Carina, look at this,
Bryce insisted. Turning to him, Alfie said,
You like that one, do you? She's one of my favourites too. Not the most beautiful example of her kind, but special nonetheless.
Where did you get this picture? Asked Bryce.
It's in the National Archives. A perfect example of historians ignoring what's right under their noses. They say it's an artist's creation, a work of the imagination. All I can say is, if I was an artist, I would draw something that looked a bit prettier. It's very utilitarian, right? If you study the picture closely, it's perfectly obvious what everything's for.
While Alfie had been talking, Carina had worked her way across the crowded room to Bryce's side. He was looking at a 2D representation of a starship. It took less than a second for recognition to dawn. The drawing was simple, without schematics, as if the creator had only wanted to record the external appearance of the ship. The background was plain white, not a starscape as the real backdrop would have been. A ship this vast could only have been constructed in space. Her pulse beating in her ears, Carina turned to Alfie. This vessel, what do you know about her?
The ZSS Hangxingde. She was the last colony ship ever built. I bet you didn't know that, huh? What a ship she must have been. The pinnacle of starship technology, and most of it lost now, of course. So much knowledge just... He heaved a sigh. The Hangxingde. So that's her real name. On the wall hung a picture of the Bathsheba.
Chapter 29. Alfie Binger chuckled uneasily. His gaze flicked between each of them in turn, as if he was trying to probe the truth from their eyes. He got to his feet, stepped carefully through his hoard of Exodus paraphernalia to the window, and peered through the blinds. Then he walked to the other side of the room, where double glass doors gave a view of his overgrown yard. Craning his neck to left and right, he checked the rear of his house. He turned to face them.
This is a joke, right? A setup. Did that journalist send you here?
He scanned their bodies.
Is one of you recording this?
Though his words were aggressive, his tone was semi-hopeful, as if he wanted to be proven wrong. No one is recording anything, Carina replied. What I've told you is absolutely 100% true. It isn't a joke or a lie. They'd anticipated the Exodus testifier might not believe they were from a starship, but no one had been able to think of a way to prove it. Any piece of technology small enough to carry could easily be from Earth. They couldn't expect him to be able to tell that it wasn't. As they'd discovered with Matt, when everything could be faked, proving anything was hard. They would have to rely on Alfie taking them at their word. Carina hadn't told him the part about them being mages, sensing it would be a step too far and tip him over the edge into disbelief. If he kicked them out, it would end any hope of having an Earth person on their side. He took a deep breath and exhaled. All right, Let's say for now I believe you and that you really did arrive on the Hangxingzi. But how could the ship have survived all this time? By testifier's reckoning, she left at least 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years in Earth time, Carina said. You're forgetting the time dilation effect. While thousands of years passed here, the Bathsheba, the Hangxingzi, might only have been in existence for hundreds of years. We don't actually know how old she is. All we know is she's very old, and she has tech that's unknown in my galactic sector. She meant the self-repairing surfaces she'd noticed after the battle for the ship, but there was more about the Bathsheba that she'd never seen before. She'd never discovered what was original and what had been installed by Lomang. Now she knew the truth about the ship's origins. She suspected none of it was Lomang's doing, and it was all the peak of Earth's colony ship technology. "The galactic sector where you're from?" Alfie asked. "You mean there's more than one?" "There are 4 I'm aware of. There may be more. Humans have been spreading across the galaxy for a long time." He rubbed his forehead. "It's a lot to take in. I want to believe you, I really do. But if what you're saying is true, how come you're the first to return? And why don't we receive communications from these hundreds of colony worlds?" That's what people always say when arguing with testifiers, and to be honest, I've never had an answer. When it comes to Earth, we had to travel a very long way to get here. We've lived 10 years on our journey, but we've spent even longer in deep sleep. Deep sleep? Is that like hibernation? I've read about it. We also call it stasis. Basically, the body's functions slow down to a barely perceptible rate. You're alive, but only just, and there's a small but significant death rate. My guess is the colonists who survived the journey didn't want to risk a trip back. They also had their work cut out simply surviving and creating a livable world for their offspring. Later generations might not have seen the point in travelling all the way to Earth when other habitable planets were much closer. Or perhaps the Earth's coordinates had been lost. We had a hell of a time finding them. But you did? He stared intently into her eyes. You made the journey. Why? And why haven't I heard about it? The arrival of a starship would be all over the news. Would it? Carina asked. It seems to me from what you've said that people in power don't want to acknowledge there might be human life on other planets. There is that, but the Hangxingzi is huge. There's no hiding her. Someone would have spotted her by now. Are you saying that governments have silenced everyone who's seen her? She's behind the moon. Right, he drawled, considering. But she had to reach the moon. How did she travel through the solar system unnoticed? Darius had cloaked her as they neared Earth, but telling Alfie that would complicate matters. Look, Carina said, if you need to be convinced, why not come and see her? We can take you to her right now. The colour drained from his face and his eyes grew round. Travel to a starship? Me? We arrived by shuttle, but we had to leave it on the edge of the city. Our pilot is waiting there. We can take you to it, only we can't travel by public transportation. We have to walk. Fortunately, he didn't question the part about avoiding the metro system. You would take me to your starship behind the moon? This can't be happening. Wait, he gestured excitedly. I have to tell some people about this. No one's going to believe me. Can you take more of us? I have some friends in this city. It wouldn't take long. No, just you. It's too risky to take anyone else. Yeah, I get it. He tapped his nose. We need to keep this a secret. It's safer that way. Exactly. Are you ready to go? Do you need to bring anything? Can I bring an interface? He rose to his feet. It's probably better that you don't have any evidence of what you're about to see. Carina hesitated. Alfie, I want you to understand. If you come with us, you're putting your life at risk. There's a lot I haven't told you yet. You'll find out about it soon, but it's important that we convince you we are who we say we are."
"She's deadly serious," Bryce added. "Join up with us, and you could die."
"Die?" Alfie sank into his seat. "It's that dangerous?"
"It is,"
Fern replied gravely. "We've lost many people over the course of our journey, and not from deep sleep death." Carina said, "It's only fair that you know, but the reason we're here is because we desperately need the help of someone from Earth, and only an Exodus testifier would believe us." "I wouldn't say even I completely believe you just yet," said Alfie, "but I'm prepared to keep an open mind. As to the risks," his expression hardened with resolve. "All my life I've been laughed at for being a testifier. I've struggled with jobs, girlfriends, you name it. Nearly everyone I know thinks I'm a crackpot. They're nice enough to my face, but I know that behind my back they talk about me and snigger. Well, here's my chance to prove them wrong. I'm taking it, no matter what might happen. Besides, who would turn down an invitation to visit a freaking starship? If it's the last thing I do, I won't have any regrets." Though everyone from the Bathsheba was tired after their long walk, it was Alfie who was out of breath soon after they set off. He finally took seriously Carina's insistence that they avoided public transportation. Naturally, they couldn't transport to the shuttle with him in tow. He was in poor physical shape and already overly excited. She was worried a sudden introduction to mage powers could give him a heart attack. Moreover, he might be reminded of the general alert and get spooked. "But why walk?" he asked 2 or 3 times, puffing and panting. "It's an awfully long way." Rather than repeat her response that she would explain later, yet again, Carina snapped, "We're wanted by the police." This new information drew him to a halt. "What for? What have you done?" He seemed to be rethinking his decision. "We were picked up because we don't have chips." "Ah, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, foot power it is, but you'll have to slow down. I haven't walked this far since I was a teenager." He tried to get more information about the Bathsheba from them, but Carina shut him down. The risk of being overheard by someone who knew something about their situation was tiny, but also not worth taking. Poor Alfie was so footsore by the time they reached the place they'd hidden the shuttle, he was limping. The vessel was at the bottom of an abandoned quarry, camouflage sheeting echoing the dusty, rocky landscape. "Where is it?" he asked as they peered over the edge. "I can't see a thing." "You're not supposed to," said Oriana. They followed the narrow trail down the quarry's edge. The place was as deserted as it had been when they left, though there were signs that children came here to play. A circuit for bicycle riders had been created from piles of dirt and scrap wood. The sight of it made Carina's heart ache. It was an ordinary, simple construction, but for her it symbolized the childhood she and her siblings had never known. Their upbringings had been far from ordinary. She hoped that one day their children would play happily somewhere like this, without a care in the world. "Where is it?" Fern asked. "I've lost my bearings. I thought Shao landed over there." He pointed, and Carina also couldn't make out the lines of the shuttle. Fear gripped her guts. Was the vessel still here? Or had Castiel found it somehow and taken it? Lifting her head, she scanned the ridges above them. They seemed empty. Alfie had been struggling to catch his breath since they reached the base of the quarry. He squeezed out, "I get it. Very funny. It isn't nice to tease an old man, you know. You really had me going for a while, though, I don't mind admitting." Bryce had walked ahead of the group. He strode confidently forward until he reached a spot that looked no different from its surrounds. Reaching up, he rapped with his knuckles, resulting in a hollow metallic sound.
You're all blind."
Carina sagged with relief and removed her hand from her elixir canister. She'd been convinced they were about to come under attack. "Thank the stars," said Oriana. "Earth is nice, but I can't wait to get back to the ship and have a lovely hot bath." There was a rustle of shifting sheeting and Shao emerged. "Did someone knock?" "You shouldn't just come out like that," Carina admonished. "What if it had been Castiel?" "If it had been Castiel, I would be dead already. Help me get this sheet off and put away. Your mission was successful, I see." She nodded at Alfie, whose jaw looked about to drop from his head. Due to their repeated experience of applying and removing the camouflage, the task was quickly completed. While they worked, Alfie simply stood and stared. When it came time to board and return to the Bathsheba, Nala called out, "We're ready for you, Mr. Binger. Would you step this way?" He didn't move. He was weeping. Chapter 30. Watching the two Earthmen facing off would have been funny if the time remaining to solve the Mage's problems hadn't been so tight. Matt and Alfie sat on opposite sides of the mission room, glaring at each other. Van Hasty and Jackson were here too, as well as Bryce, Nala and Ava. Somehow they all had to come to a decision about how the coming days would play out, but the Earthers' disagreement was getting in the way. "You stupid young pup," Alfie said. "You're sitting inside a colony ship, and you won't believe the evidence of your own eyes. How much more convincing do you need?"
"It's all fake, you gullible old fool. You believe it because you want to believe it. Or maybe you're fake too. Are you part of this? If you are, I warn you, you're committing a serious crime. Every single person here will do jail time when this comes out."
"Alfie," Carina said, "whether or not Matt believes the Bathsheba is real is beside the point. We've tried to get his help, but he won't take us seriously because he thinks we're tricking him. That's why we brought you here. We've explained the situation. Can you think of any way you can help us? Is there a person or an organization we can approach who will be able to root out our enemies and eliminate their influence?" She had 3 days. 3 days until the Black Dogs would fulfill their threat of going down to Earth. Shao would take them. After the crisis involving the Obliterator, Carina was in little doubt about it. And if Shao refused, Bibic would do it. The mercs let loose on peaceful Earth would trigger scenarios she cringed to contemplate. Jackson had already killed someone. Wherever they went, the dogs would leave a trail of destruction in their wake. They would wind up dead or permanently incarcerated, destroying the rep of all the Bathsheba's passengers in the process. Some of them might do okay. The long voyage had tamed some of the dogs, but the hardcore bunch, their personalities were perfect for survival on the fringes of galactic civilization, but on Earth they were anomalies, incapable of fitting in. It was a difficulty she'd never anticipated, not in all the many times she'd played out in her head their arrival at their destination. She'd become so used to the merc's behavior and attitudes, she hadn't factored it into her planning. Now they represented as much of a problem as the mages, though an entirely different one. "It's hard for me to say," Alfie replied after considering for a few moments. "I'm just an ordinary man. I don't have friends in high places. Even my friends don't have friends in high places." "But you know how things work, right?" asked Carina. "Where I grew up I was a nobody, a street rat, but I could have told you who was pushing the buttons on my planet. My galactic sector was controlled by rival clans, and everyone knew it. The same has to be true everywhere. There have to be people on Earth who hold the real power, people we can approach to fix things without too much bloodshed."
"I told you before," said Matt. "Assuming this fantasy you're all playing out is true, approaching those people isn't going to help you. Not if your brother is manipulating them."
"I could suggest a few names," said Alfie. Maybe that would help. Matt snapped.
Don't encourage them. You'll only get yourself in trouble. Aiding and abetting a kidnapping is a felony.
Some names would be a great help, said Carina. Nala, could you take notes? Yet as she spoke, a sinking feeling hit the pit of her stomach. Despite Matt's skepticism, he made a good point. The web of Castiel's influence had been woven over decades, with the help of mages. How could she hope to ever tear it down, let alone within 3 days? Alfie wanted to see the deep sleep chamber again. He'd already seen it on his first quick tour of the ship. Carina had felt obliged to show him around a little before springing the reason for his invitation. She hadn't told him about mages yet, and she wasn't sure he fully understood their difficulties, but at least he seemed prepared to help. Hoping she might gain some further insights about Earth, Carina agreed to return with him to the chamber. While he peered into an open capsule, she stood in the centre of the vast space, recalling the first time she'd set foot on the Bathsheba. She and Cadwallader had extracted the security codes to enter the airlocks from Lomang, and she'd used one to open the hatch that led directly here. The battle with Mezban's soldiers for control of the ship had taken place in this spot. You really spent years inside one of these eggs? Alfie asked. It isn't as bad as it sounds. You're entirely unconscious. It's like going to sleep and waking up again. It's better for the body to return to consciousness regularly, so we spent years awake too. Do you factor deep sleep years into your age? How old are you? She shrugged. It's possible to figure it out, but no one bothers. Age is just a number. That's how I think about it too. He straightened up, his rotund belly protruding, and ran a hand through his scant hair. What wouldn't I give to travel across the galaxy? I don't suppose there's a chance you might go back one day. He grinned cheekily. Are you proposing to come with us if we do? Would you have me? I don't know what I could do to earn my passage, but I'd be prepared to do anything. Clean, cook, whatever. I'm sorry, Alfie. We won't be going back. It took us so long to get here, and people lost their lives to help us make it. I don't think I could explain it to you properly even if we had time. Your experience of life is so different from mine, so limited. How could she even begin to explain about the Shurras, the Dirksons, Lomang and Mezban, the Regians, the mage-controlled society of Magog, or any of the other myriad people and places she'd experienced? His knowledge was confined to one planet. What do you mean, if we had time? He asked. You seem to be in a rush to find these people who want to prevent you from settling on Earth. But you're safe enough tucked away behind the moon. Why are you in such a big hurry to fix things? Did you see Jackson and Van Hasty at the meeting just now? The bruisers? I wouldn't like to meet either of them in a dark alley. They're mercenaries. They helped us get here, and they're my friends. But they're impatient. They want to go to Earth now. If I don't figure something out soon, they'll do it and mess everything up. Gotcha. You're in a pickle. I hope those names I gave you are useful. Thanks. I appreciate it. I appreciate you bringing me here. I got the better end of the bargain, that's for sure. What else is there to see on this amazing vessel? I still feel like I'm dreaming, but if I am, I don't want it to stop. She took him to the Twilight Dome, always a showstopper even for the Bathsheba's long-term passengers. The view thrilled him so much she feared she might have to comm a medic. The sight caused him to collapse into a seat. Eventually he said, "Why isn't it complete?" "You mean the transparent overhead? A bomb blew out a section of it. It's the weakest part of the hull." "A bomb?" "If I were to tell you everything that's happened since I first decided I wanted to come to Earth, it would take a very long time. Do you want to stay here a while or see more of the ship?" "I'll stay here," he murmured, transfixed. "Then I'll see you later. Come and find me when you're ready." She gave him the deck and number of her cabin. "When do I have to go back to Earth?" "Have to go back? You don't have to go back. Or not for a while, anyway. Do you want to go home?" "Hell no! I'm staying as long as I can." "That's good to hear. It's dangerous for us to go planetside. I'll find somewhere for you to sleep." "Planetside," he echoed. "I love the sound of that. I could get used to that word." "See you later, Alfie." She went to her cabin and was disappointed but not surprised to discover it was empty. She didn't know where Bryce was spending his time these days. She checked her comms, but there were no messages from him or anyone else. She didn't know what to do. It was too early to ask Nala if she'd gotten anywhere with the names Alfie had given her. And if she did get somewhere, how would they even begin to untangle Castiel's web? She slumped into a chair and put her head in her hands. Chapter 31. Each minute of the last 2 days had dragged past, and yet time had also moved at an astonishing speed. Only 1 day remained until the Black Dog ringleaders would carry out their threat and begin a mass disembarkation of the Bathsheba. All Carina's plans, everything she'd done to bring her family to Earth, the sacrifices of the people who had died, it would all come to nothing. She and her siblings would be in a worse situation than they'd been in their home sector. If they'd stayed there, they would have been forced to live in secret, but at least they wouldn't have faced the threat of Castiel hunting them down. She wouldn't have had Commander Key out for her blood. Van Hasty and Jackson had been subdued around her, as if they felt guilty for the imminent prospect of going to Earth. But guilt wouldn't stop them, and nor would the ties of comradeship. At the end of the day, the dogs were hard-hearted mercenaries. They'd survived in their dangerous careers this long because they put themselves first. Fighting depression and despair, Carina went to see Nala. She could have talked to her over comm, but she yearned to see a friendly, familiar face. Bryce had continued to avoid her, and she had been avoiding her other siblings because she felt she'd let them down. "Hey," said Nala, with a tone of surprise as Carina walked in. "I didn't expect to see you here." She hadn't been to her youngest sister's cabin for a long time. Copies of the ancient mage documents covered the walls like strange works of art. Her bed was unmade, sofa cushions were scattered on the floor, and used dishes, mugs, and cutlery sat on the table. Following Carina's gaze with her own, Nala seemed to notice these things for the first time. "It's a mess, right?" she said with some embarrassment. "I'll tidy up." "Don't bother, I don't mind." Carina moved some clothing aside to sit down. "Are you any further ahead with the names Alfie gave us?" Nala had already discovered significant information on the men and women. The testifier had been correct that they were among the greatest movers and shakers in Earth society, and therefore likely to be under Castiel's influence. Yet how to reach them was unclear, or even how to approach the mages manipulating them. It was doubtful that Castiel was doing the work himself. He would have lackeys to take the fall if they were discovered, and there was no telling a mage from a non-mage by outward appearances. Nala idly swiped the screen of her interface. "Honestly, no. I've been working on it all night, and I managed to access some encrypted comm channels, but it's slow work, and I haven't found anything useful. I mean, not immediately useful. I found out the head of a media empire is being blackmailed about a serious violation of environmental protection laws, and a business mogul made some very odd deals, creating a large profit for a shady company. These things would take weeks to get to the bottom of," Carina interrupted. "Months, perhaps years. It's almost impossible to approach any of these people in person. They have small retinues of highly vetted staff who are the only people they interact with personally on a day-to-day basis. Castiel must have wrangled mages into these teams, but as for telling who they are, and then finding out how our brother is controlling them, she turned her hands palm upwards in a gesture of helplessness. You're saying we might never do it. Castiel has decades on us. In a way, it's remarkable that his hatred of us runs so deep he would go to all this trouble. He always wanted an empire. That's why he betrayed us to the Dirksons. He thought they were his ticket to dominion over a whole galactic sector. Now he has that empire here on Earth. It isn't exactly a sector, but it will do. Making my dream impossible is only a side benefit. Our dream, Nala corrected. It became our dream too, somewhere along the way. Carina reached out and grasped her sister's hand. Thanks for saying that. I feel as though I dragged you here for nothing. I'm sorry the dream didn't come true. Someone was calming her. She accepted it. Hello? A voice shouted in her ear. Can you hear me? She winced. Alfie, is that you? Ah, good. I've just been given one of your shipboard devices. Wasn't sure if it worked. They work the same as they do on Earth. You don't need to raise your voice. Oops, sorry. Can I help you? Alfie Binger had been enjoying himself immensely in his short time aboard the Bathsheba. He'd been seen all over the ship and become everyone's friend. He'd also familiarized himself with every aspect of her layout and had at least a cursory understanding of everything. I've been talking to that nice man about your problem. He's explained it in more detail, especially about you and your family. I'm not sure I quite believe it, but my eyes have been opened so much in the last 48 hours, I think I'm prepared to believe just about anything. A nice man? Who have you been talking to? She imagined it must be Bryce, but Alfie knew his name. I think he's called Jackson. Carina was entirely mystified how Jackson had gone from a bruiser to a nice person in Alfie's estimation, but she couldn't be bothered to go into it. So you know about mages? Is that what you wanted to talk about? I'd love to when we have more time, but Jackson said your problem was urgent and you had to find a solution soon. He didn't explain why. No kidding. And I think I have an idea. She paused. What possible strategy could the man from Earth suggest? He'd only just discovered that mages existed. He couldn't have much understanding of what they could do, or the depths of evilness of a dark mage like Castiel. Not holding out much hope, she said, Let's hear it. Move your ship into Earth orbit. Show the world you exist. Go public, then go planetside. You'll be celebrities. You'll have the protection of being famous. Your brother won't dare do anything to you. Go public? Nala was watching her, hearing only one side of the conversation. Carina transferred the comm to her cabin system. Alfie, can you repeat your idea so my sister can hear it? As Nala listened, she met Carina's gaze. She didn't seem to immediately dismiss Alfie's suggestion. But will the public even find out we're there? Carina asked. My impression is Earth's locked up tight when it comes to the existence of colony ships. A lot of people simply won't believe the evidence, like Matt. Others would be very upset about being proven wrong. So upset they might do something about it. And my brother would do his damnedest to wipe any mention of us from the media. That's where the testifiers come in, said Alfie. We're all over the place. In every country, every major city of the world. We're in all the businesses, all the professions. Of course, we aren't all out in the open. No one likes being laughed at. But at the last count, our official membership stood at over 75,000. And that's only the people who have paid their subs. There are plenty who believe but don't subscribe. And plenty more who are sitting on the fence. But the minute they see images of the Hang Xing-Zhe, she'll tip them right off it. 75,000? The reporter who had interviewed him hadn't done his homework. He had guesstimated 10,000. Nala's features brightened with excitement. The testifiers would bombard the news stations with images, flood social media, that kind of thing. You've got it, and more besides. Send them scenes from the ship's interior. Show them Earth viewed through the Twilight Dome. We'll overload the world with information. The return of the Hang Xingzi will go viral. And then there'll be no stopping you. Everyone will want to talk to you. You'll be on every talk show, every current affairs program. No station will turn you down because you'll be who the viewers want to see. You'll have a platform, Nala said, eyes shining. You can explain all about mages and their pacifist culture. You can suggest all the good you could do in the world, and you can set boundaries so you aren't exploited or oppressed. Mages never had a voice before. I don't know, said Carina. The last time mages were out in the open on Earth, they were blamed for all the problems and driven off planet. Earth doesn't have most of the problems it had then. What are you going to be blamed for? Carina was confident Castiel would think of something. On the other hand, she didn't have a better idea, and they were nearly out of time.
Chapter 32. Finally! Van Hasty exclaimed. You're finally seeing sense. Shove the obliterator in their faces, then let's see what they have to say. That isn't what this is about, Carina replied. Not at all. The deck shifted slightly under her feet as Xiao pulled the Bathsheba away from her position on the far side of the moon. Huh? Van Hasty's lip lifted quizzically. Then what is it about? It's a publicity exercise. It's a what? The merc turned to Jackson. Do you know what she's talking about? Beats me. I'm just glad something's happening, and we might not be stuck in this tin can much longer. We won't be stuck in here much longer anyway, Van Hasty replied. We've only got, she checked her console, 19 hours to go. Then Earth is our playground. Man, I can't wait to set foot on solid ground again. Jackson rolled his shoulders. I can't wait to find out what new and interesting drinks they serve in Earth bars. Who knows? He grinned wickedly. I might even get into a fight. Aren't you forgetting something? Carina asked. Something about being wanted for murder? A tiny detail. I'm sure you guys will figure it out. You can enchant someone, or whatever it is you do. It's called enthrall and... Never mind. If mages were to live safely on Earth, they couldn't ever do anything outside the law. It wouldn't take much to change public opinion about them. As Bryce had pointed out, mage powers made non-mages feel helpless and inadequate. They would have to tread carefully, and that meant no enthralling law enforcers. Jackson's crime was a bridge she would have to cross when she came to it. Xiao looked over her shoulder. You're absolutely sure about this? Now you're asking me? The pilot had been more gung-ho about it when under orders from the Black Dogs. I'm sure. The bridge door opened and her family poured in, Bryce at their rear. We're starting? Oriana asked. This is so exciting. Carina had outlined Alfie's idea to them and asked for their agreement before trying it out. They'd given it, unsurprisingly. What did they have to lose? We're going ahead. Where's Mr. Binger? Nala asked. He's in a comm room. He wanted a private space to talk with his buddies. Xiao said, Okay, we're out of the moon's shadow. Anyone on Earth watching this part of the sky is going to see something very interesting. Take us there, Carina said. Got it. Low Earth orbit. The Bathsheba would circle the globe, visible even to the naked eye, for as long as it took people to notice, which, Carina guessed, wouldn't be long. Better say goodbye to your favourite spots on the ship, kids, said Jackson. He hadn't gotten out of the habit of calling them that, even though they were now fully grown. Earth, here we come. The following interval passed in tense silence.
until finally Alfie calmed Carina. "The Hangxingzi has been spotted. It's breaking news on all the media stations." "Great. You're talking to your friends?" "You better believe it. They're going wild down there. This is gonna be big. The biggest event of my generation. The biggest event in centuries." She asked Xiao to give them a visual. A hollow of earth opened in the center of the bridge. The slowly turning blue and green globe, wreathed in clouds, grew steadily larger. Her heart beat faster at the same rate the image increased in size. Could Alfie's plan really work? It seemed impossible. Bryce stood on the opposite side of the bridge. She wished she could go over to him and hold his hand, or feel his arm around her as they waited. But the distance between them was more than ordinary space. It was a gulf of differences she didn't think could ever be spanned. Alfie was still chattering in her ear, but she'd missed his last few sentences, except that he'd sounded urgent. "What did you say?" "The head of the ETA, Exodus Testifiers Association, wants to speak to you. How do I patch her through?" "Wait a minute, I'll come over there." It was a simpler solution than explaining the comm system. She transported herself to Alfie's location and instantly regretted it. Alfie turned white as a sheet and clutched his chest. "Where did you come from? How did you do that?" "Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. I'll talk to the person from your association." His hand trembling, he turned the mic toward her. "Hello? This is Carina Lin of the Bathsheba, though you may know her as the Hangxingzi." "Hi, Miss Lin. I'm Frankie Longbarrow, representative of the ETA. To say I'm pleased to make your acquaintance is a massive understatement. Alfie's been telling me all about you and your ship. This is going to blow the Exodus deniers out of the water. I can't wait to meet you in person. But I should warn you, we're already getting pushback from the media. Some respected pundits are saying it's a hoax, a silly stunt, and that your vessel isn't real." "We thought that might happen. We have someone from Earth who's actually been aboard for several days, and even he doesn't believe it." And, no doubt, Castiel and his mages were at work, getting others to deny the Bathsheba's existence. "Don't worry. With the images and information Alfie's been sending us, as well as the followers we have all over the world, everyone will have to face the truth of what's up in the sky. And as soon as we can get you and your crew down here, we'll have living proof to back it up." "But couldn't they say we're actors?" The idea had just occurred to her. "Not after we have your genome sequenced. You're descended from people who left Earth thousands of generations ago. Your DNA will prove it." Right. Giving up her genetic code wasn't something she'd anticipated. It almost certainly held the secret to her magehood, and so it could be used to identify other mages within the population. Yet if they were to win public trust, they had to be transparent. "I'll have to think about that." Fine, said Frankie. "One step at a time. We mustn't get ahead of ourselves. This is amazing. I can't believe it's happened in my lifetime. I feel like this generation is the luckiest alive. So are you in a way. Several tech companies have approached the association for confirmation that a colony ship really has returned. They'll give their eye teeth plus a lot of money to access everything on your vessel." I hadn't thought of that angle. "There will be many angles no one thought of popping up over the next few days. When will you be able to come to the surface? Alfie says you have a shuttle and he's flown in it, the lucky devil." "We're going to sit tight for a day and see how things pan out. How does that sound?" "Whatever you say. You're the one calling the shots. We'll keep up the pressure on the media, academia, and businesses down here. You can leave everything in the ETA's hands." "I should go and see what's happening on the ship." "It's a privilege to meet you, Carina Lin." To avoid giving Alfie another turn, Carina stepped out of the comm room before transporting to the bridge. Everything was much as she'd left it. Her siblings had spread out around the space, and Earth had grown so large it occupied the entire hollow. "Entering orbit in 3 minutes 50, said Shao. "What's happening planetside?" "A war of opinion from the sound of it. Castiel is trying to erase the knowledge of our existence from public consciousness, and the testifiers are forcing the Bathsheba down their throats."
"Who's gonna win, I wonder?"
Bryce asked softly.
Van Hasty said, "You know the obliterator's still an option, right? It wouldn't take a minute to blast Castiel's base to smoke and ashes.
If you remember, there's the small matter of the hundreds of other people we would kill," Carina countered. When Van Hasty seemed unmoved, she added, "And Castiel might not be there anymore. If he has any sense, he will have left the second we flew out from the cover of the moon." Van Hasty shrugged.
"Maybe, but it would send a message."
"Exactly the kind of message I don't want to send. I don't get why that's so hard for you to understand." Carina despaired of ever refocusing certain mercs' minds away from violence. She watched Earth's surface, oceans and continents moving slowly past. They were approaching with the sun at their backs. In galactic terms, the planet wasn't old, but its intelligent life was. The oldest human life in the galaxy, some said. It was certainly the origin planet of mages. Had those who had fled persecution ever imagined that one day their descendants would return? She thought of the mages she'd left behind. Did the council still exist? Magda, the spirit mage, had died saving Jace's life, and Justin had been murdered by Castiel. How would the young mages be summoned to a matching without their spirit mage? How would they meet, marry, and have children when they lived secretly, often hidden even from each other? Taking Darius from them had weighed on her conscience, but she didn't regret it. A 7-year-old couldn't bear responsibility for the destiny of all the mages in a sector. It was too much to ask, no matter what the consequences. "The Bathsheba is in Earth orbit," Shao announced. Whoops and hollers of celebration followed. An alarm blared out, cutting through the noise. The voices stuttered to silence until only the alarm could be heard. "What the hell?" Van Hasty breathed in disbelief, looking up from a console. "Hull breach! Deck 4! "We've been fired on?" Carina asked. "Shao, any signs of ships on the long-range scanners?" "Not a thing." "I don't understand. What about an attack from the surface?" "No way. We would have picked it up." Then she turned hopelessly to Van Hasty, who stared intently at her console. The alarm blared on, unremitting. Carina calmed the dogs, sending a breach team to Deck 4. The Bathsheba would self-repair eventually, but a hull breach was too risky to leave unattended. "Another breach!" yelled Van Hasty. "Deck 2!" Open-mouthed shock permeated the bridge. "But how?" "Should I take us out of orbit?" Shao asked. "I don't know. Stand by." Carina consulted the data from the ship's sensors for herself. There was nothing to indicate they'd been fired upon. No record of a burst of energy in their vicinity or traces of an after-effect. "Breach on Deck 7, Van Hasty snapped. "It's the dome." The Bathsheba seemed to be splitting apart of her own volition. Splitting apart? It's split! Castiel is casting split on the ship. "That can't be it," said Parthenia. "The Bathsheba is far too large to be affected by split. When he used it on Ostalon, it only worked on shuttlecraft." "But it isn't only Castiel," Fern retorted gravely. "He has all the mages on Earth working with him." Chapter 33. The noise of the alarm bounced around inside Carina's skull, growing louder and louder. She realized it wasn't only the alarm she was hearing, but voices yelling as the debate about what to do grew more and more heated. "Shut up! I can't hear myself think!" The voices quietened. "Turn off that goddamned alarm too! We know what's happening!" Reports of more breaches had flooded in. The bridge was sealed off, and everyone else on the ship was wearing EVA suits due to the threat of depressurization. Silence fell, but it was only short-lived. Van Hasty got up in Carina's face. "We need to fire the obliterator, now! We're not taking this attack lying down!" "Fire it on what? The thousands of mages dotted all over the planet? If you fire that thing, you'll kill thousands of civilians. Maybe it'll make your sick shit of a brother step down. He won't care. He'll blame us, and rightly. We'll be the ones firing. No one on Earth understands about mages. They won't know we were trying to defend ourselves." "Damn it, Lin," Van Hasty spat. "What happened to you? You lost your guts somewhere along the way." "I didn't lose anything. I gained something. The ability to think before I acted. Now back off." Van Hasty stepped away, glaring. "We could try repulse," Oriana suggested. "Against thousands of mages?" Carina shook her head. "Even Darius couldn't fend off that many casts all at once." "I could try," he said. "It would exhaust you, and we need you as our last line of defense." "The dogs can't keep pace with the breaches," Shao reported. "We need to think about evacuation." "To the surface?" asked Carina. "Where Castiel has a welcoming party?" "I can cloak the shuttle," said Darius. "I hate to mention it," Shao said, "but it won't accommodate more than half the passengers, and at the rate the hull is disintegrating, there won't be time for a second trip." "Decide who is to go and who will stay, awaiting the Bathsheba's destruction? Who could make those choices?" Parthenia said, "Whoever goes to Earth might be able to hide from Castiel for some time, providing he doesn't know where the shuttle lands. Perhaps we could draw lots. Little Carina and Ava must go, naturally." Carina had almost forgotten about Ava's daughter, her namesake. Her throat constricted, and she swallowed the lump that had formed there. "And Officer Matt and Alfie Binger," Parthenia continued. "This isn't their fight." "Alfie!" Carina exclaimed. "I'd forgotten all about him." She calmed the Earthman. "I need you to tell me what reports are coming from Earth. Has there been any news on the state of the ship?" "Ah, that's what all the clamour was about. Thank goodness it stopped. It was giving me a headache." "Alfie," she repeated, "what's the news from Earth about the Bathsheba?" "An awful lot of debate about her existence, but the believers seem to be winning. According to Ms. Longbarrow, some wonderful images of her have appeared on all the news channels." "Nothing about her breaking up?" "Breaking up?" "Sorry, try not to worry about it. Just stay where you are, okay? Don't leave that room." The door would seal if the adjoining passageway depressurized. She cut the comm. "No one on Earth knows what's happening. I guess the breaches aren't immediately obvious, especially when most people have never seen a starship," Parthenia said. "So the Bathsheba will fall apart and tumble from the sky, and Castiel's people will be able to play it off as if she never existed." "Something like that," Carina muttered. "And if any of us survive," said Fern, "he can hunt us at his leisure." "At least 3 breaches on all decks," Shao reported. "Decks 4 through 7 fully depressurized." "Lin!" Van Hasty barked. "Make a decision, or I will." The deadly peril everyone aboard faced pressed in on Carina like the atmosphere of a high-grav planet. She struggled to breathe as fears hammered her mind, destroying her thought processes. "I wish we had a way to send to all those mages," Oriana pined. "If only we could talk to them and explain who we are and why we're here." "Castiel must have fed them a bunch of lies," said Fern. "Or he's put them in fear of their lives if they don't do what he says." Nala said, "More likely he's put them in fear of someone else losing their life, someone they love. That's how he operates." "But if they all stood up to him at once," said Oriana, "he would have no choice but to back down. He can't defend himself against all of them at the same time." Fern sighed. "There's no point in wishing. We don't know all those people. We don't have any of their personal items. How could we locate them among Earth's millions? Carina sucked in a great gulp of air. We can send to them. Darius can do it. But how? Oriana asked. He doesn't need anything to locate them. He's a spirit mage. He can summon them. A pause followed. Everyone was still. Jackson frowned. He can what? Do it, Darius, Carina urged, adding, do you remember how? You do know how to summon, right? Anxiety gnawed at her stomach as he blinked, thinking. He'd only spent a few weeks with the old mage Magda. The long days he'd attended her lessons in her tent had made Carina angry at the time. She had been jealous of the woman's influence on her brother and considered the expectations she had of him too great. But now she prayed with all her heart that Magda had taught him the cast that only spirit mages could perform. I think so, he quietly replied. I'd forgotten about it until you mentioned it. I recall learning the cast, but I never had a chance to practice it. This will be my first time. Oh, you have to reach them, Darius, said Oriana. Tell them mages are aboard the ship they're destroying, as well as lots of innocent people. Ask them to please stop, and tell them Castiel is a dark mage who will hurt them. Tell them we have another way for them to live, that they won't have to hide any more. That's rather a lot, Darius nervously quipped. Carina took her canister of elixir from her belt and set it down in front of him. In case you need extra. Parthenia, Oriana and Fern did the same. Nala kissed his cheek. Good luck. Darius looked from face to face, unscrewed the lid of his elixir bottle and drank. Carina caught Bryce's gaze. Making eye contact with him broke the dam, and her tears flooded out. The last thing she wanted was for her youngest brother to carry the responsibility of saving everyone's lives. But they were out of options. She sank into a seat, wretched with despair. All attention in the bridge was on Darius. Even Shao had ceased monitoring her screens. The young man's eyes were shut tight, and his brow furrowed with concentration. Beads of sweat erupted on his forehead. His lips moved silently. It was working. He was talking to the other mages. A scene from a long time ago popped into Carina's mind. A little boy with a mop of dark hair mentally conversing with a star whale, a living creature that flew between the stars, asking how it was doing, and entirely forgetting the important part of the message. Darius would not forget this time. Without opening his eyes, he blindly reached for another canister of elixir. Oriana snatched one up and thrust it into his hands. He drank. Beads of sweat on his forehead coalesced and ran down his face. His skin paled, and the line between his brows deepened. His shoulders lifted and fell as his chest heaved. Shao swiveled to consult her screens and then turned back to face Darius. Carina didn't dare ask if her brother's efforts were having an effect. She didn't dare break his concentration. Halfway through his fourth canister of elixir, his eyes opened. Instantly, he collapsed, flopping forward, propping his elbows on his knees while his head hung low. Carina stepped to his side and gently touched his shoulder. It's done, he whispered. She looked to Shao for confirmation. The pilot nodded, a grin wreathing her face. No more breaches! Thank the stars! Oriana exclaimed. That was fantastic, Darius. Nala smiled. You always were my hero. But Darius was beyond hearing them. He looked utterly spent. Jackson, Carina said, could you coordinate the repairs? That kid's a marvel. It went without saying. Though she hardly dared believe it, a small flame of hope flared in Carina's chest. If Darius could speak to all Earth's mages, albeit at a great expense of energy, there was a chance they could defeat Castiel. A dark mage could not summon, and they would already be afraid of him. He couldn't hide his true nature for very long. and the testifiers were working to make sure he couldn't cover up the arrival of the Bathsheba, along with her friendly mages, here to do good and help humankind. Though things had looked dicey for a while, the publicity stunt had worked. "Someone's hailing us from the surface," Van Hasty said. "Won't give his name. Says Carina will know who he is." The flame of hope flickered and threatened to go out. "It's Castiel," said Oriana. "No, I don't think it is. Put him on General Comm." "Ms. Lin, I felt confident we would meet again one day. I'm glad you made it here. It's quite the journey, isn't it?" "What do you want? Spit it out." "Castiel and I are impressed by your ability to persuade the mages to halt their split casts. We concede defeat. You've won. I expect we'll see you on the surface soon." "Not if I see you first, Key." She gestured to Van Hasty, drawing her finger across her throat. The merc closed the comm. "Key? That rings a bell. Commander Key of the Dirksons. He's the one who helped Castiel get here. He must like him a lot. He probably despises him, but he loved Sable Dirkson." Van Hasty grimaced. Awkward. "Do you believe the bit about them conceding defeat?" Fern asked. "Not for a second, but nevertheless, it's time to go planetside." Chapter 34. As the shuttle conveyed them to the planet's surface, Carina asked Oriana to switch places so she could sit next to Parthenia. As she settled in next to her oldest sister, Parthenia side-eyed her. "You want to talk to me? I've been thinking about this publicity tour the testifiers have set up." The group had become the mages' de facto agents, arranging interviews with all the major media channels and booking their transportation and hotels. It turned out some rather rich individuals were testifiers, and they were very happy to pay to be proven right. Everything seemed to be working as Alfie had suggested. The Hang Xingzhe's mages were already famous all over the globe. If anything happened to them, hard questions would be asked in high places. "What about it? I want you to take the lead in representing us." "But you're the oldest, and, to be frank, this was all your idea. The journalists will want to talk to the leader of our expedition, not the foot soldiers." "You were always more than a foot soldier, but that isn't the reason I'm asking you. You will be way better at giving interviews than me, and you'll give a better impression of mages and what we stand for." "What?" Parthenia turned to face her. "What are you talking about? You carry yourself like a queen, Parthenia. You always have, and you speak really well. Sometimes I think you have a thesaurus in your head. You know when to speak plainly and when to shut up. If an interviewer got on my nerves, I might run my mouth and say something I shouldn't. Basically, you grew up in a wealthy family while I was a slum brat, and it shows." Well, I'm sure Father would be delighted that my lessons in comportment, rhetoric and oratory paid off." "Will you do it?" Parthenia looked out of the window. The black of space was transforming to the crystalline blue of a cloudless sky. "What exactly do we want to tell the world about mages? This has happened so fast, I haven't had time to think about it." "I wondered about that too, but it's easy. You just need to tell them what Jace would have said, about how we don't believe in using our powers to control or hurt people, or even to gain an advantage, that we want to help people." Carina swallowed and added, "That was how my dad and Ma were trapped. Did you know? I'm not sure if I ever told you." "No, you never did." Though the story involved Stefan Scherer, Carina tried to keep him out of it as much as she could, as she explained how Ba had wanted to help people trapped by an earthquake, and that was how he and Ma had been exposed. Parthenia listened solemnly and didn't speak when Carina had finished. She continued, You were close to Jace and spent more time with him than anyone else. He knew mage culture inside out. If you're ever in any doubt about the answer to a question, you only need to ask yourself, what would Jace say? But you have to be careful about the general alert. What you'll be saying will sound awfully like what the public has been told to watch out for. You'll need to spin it so it's clear mages aren't anything to do with that. You should question it, ask where it's from, and who's behind it. When they can't answer, they'll look stupid and stop asking about it. Hopefully the alert will fade from public consciousness. After a pause, Parthenia murmured, I suppose I could do it. Oriana and Fern could help, and so could Nala. Though she isn't a mage, she could talk about what it's like growing up as a non-mage in a mage family. People will be interested to hear about that. You have to emphasize that mages aren't any better than non-mages, only different. We can make them feel inadequate, you see. That's what Bryce told me. That's what he's upset about? Yes. What about Darius? Darius and I. Carina glanced over her shoulder and caught his gaze. He had been watching and listening the whole time. We have other work to do. And Bryce? He knows what it's like living with mages too. I have no idea about Bryce's plans. A sea of expectant faces awaited them on Earth. Bibic landed the shuttle at an airport in the main city of the most powerful country, according to the testifiers. It was a place called New Tunka, capital of Balark land. They hadn't been here on any of their previous clandestine visits. Carina took a moment before stepping out of the shuttle to take in the view. The city beyond the airport boundaries looked more built up than other metropolises she'd seen, such as Alfie's, and definitely way more built up than the small town Matt was from. Officer Matt was behind her, waiting to disembark. His superiors had agreed to waive kidnapping charges, accepting there had been a misunderstanding. Ava was with him, and so was little Carina. Alfie had elected to remain on the Bathsheba, unsurprisingly. It would have taken a crowbar to lever him from the ship, despite the recent brush with destruction. New Tunka spread out to the horizon, or at least it seemed to spread out. Like everywhere else Carina had seen on Earth, the greenery of the city made it hard to distinguish what was town and what was country. No building stood higher than 3 stories, and no motorized vehicles ran along the roads. Said Oriana, standing behind her. Sorry. She took a step forward, but something buzzed into her field of vision. She swiped it, knocking the buzzing thing off course. What the hell's that? It's a camera drone, moron, Van Hasty yelled from somewhere back in the line. Move your ass, Lin. Some of us want to get a look at Earth. The drone returned, swooping in front of her face again. She frowned at it angrily, but then, remembering this was the first sight of a mage for most Earth citizens that they knew about, she forced her frown away and waved at the reporters. Despite the extreme unlikelihood of Castiel splitting her in front of the world's media, she couldn't help tensing, fearing attack, as she descended from the shuttle. No camouflage sheet this time, Oriana whispered. Be careful, Carina warned. I know this looks safe, but... Don't worry, I know my brother well. A barrier encircled the shuttle exit, preventing the reporters from approaching too close. Men in uniform stood inside it. One beckoned her. As she stepped forward, a barrage of questions began. How does it feel to arrive on Earth? Where are you from? What's the name of your planet? Are you one of the mages? Which one of you can do magic? How long did it take to get here? Have you seen aliens? Is there intelligent life on other worlds? What are your plans now you've arrived? Carina smiled but didn't answer. Apparently, the rights to the first interview with the returning colonists had been signed away for a very large sum. Miss Lin! Miss Lin! She looked for the person calling her name so insistently. A florid, middle-aged woman in a thick coat was pressed up against the barrier, waving wildly.
"They won't let me through,"
she called out as they made eye contact. "Frankie Longbarrow?"
"That's right, we finally meet, haha."
"Please let this woman in," Carina asked one of the uniformed men. "She's, part of my media team."
"I thought it was you,"
Frankie said breathlessly after ducking under the barrier.
"Alfie described you to me very well."
Carina didn't ask what he'd said. "Thanks for all the ETA's help. We could never have done this without you."
"It's our pleasure."
The endless yelled questions continued as they crossed the open space to the nearest building.
"I need to discuss your itinerary in detail," said Frankie. "It's complicated. You're going to be very busy for the next few months until things die down."
"Actually, my sister will be the main person handling the interviews."
"Oh?"
Frankie's eyebrows rose and she craned her neck, looking backward.
"Which one is she?"
"You'll soon spot her. We look very alike."
"So you're handing her the reins? I understand. You have plenty else to do."
They'd arrived at the building. The doors were open and the interior looked invitingly empty and quiet. Carina wondered if she was being selfish in asking Parthenia to present mages to the world. She couldn't deny the thought of being famous and under constant scrutiny appalled her. But her reasoning was also valid. Her oldest sister was perfectly suited to the task, whereas she was more of a behind-the-scenes person. Before entering the building, she took a look at the line of shuttle passengers stretching back to the vessel. Oriana, Fern, and Fern's latest girlfriend, who came from Marchon, walked in a little group. Matt had his arm around Ava, and she was holding her daughter's hand. Parthenia and Darius followed them, looking somewhat apprehensive. Van Hasty and Rees strode behind the pair, towering a head taller. They were unarmed, at Carina's request, and didn't appear too happy about it. Nala was with her merc partner, a man a little younger than her and far less aggressive than most of the dogs. About halfway back walked Chertang and Cheapy, bizarrely lovey-dovey now they'd arrived at their destination. The line continued on, men and women who had taken part in the long journey. In the many years of the voyage, Carina had come to know them all by name. They'd eaten and socialized together. There had been fallings out and reconciliations, anger, despair and tears, laughter, joy and delight. Soon they were to part ways. Things would never be the same again. Everyone would create a life on Earth, get jobs, have families, put down roots. She wondered how their lives would turn out. She had a feeling she would never know. Chapter 35. Carina waited 2 weeks before going after Castiel. Though the testifiers did an excellent job of guarding or destroying anything personal to the mages, realistically it was only a matter of time before their ranks were infiltrated and the dark mage would transport his siblings to his side. As long as he lived, they would be under constant threat of disappearing, never to be seen again. Over those 2 weeks, a great outpouring of data had been going on from the Bathsheba to Earth scientists. Her logs, schematics, every bit of information about her systems and all the devices aboard. Tech companies had started a bidding war for priority access, but the consensus among the ship's passengers was that they did not want to profit from her, that her tech should benefit humanity as a whole. After all, the vessel hadn't really belonged to them in the first place. "You're going to kill him?" Parthenia asked before Carina set off. "If I can." Parthenia pulled a face. Carina said quietly, "Don't you think he deserves to die, considering everything he's done?" "Yes, but I know Ma wouldn't want me to do it, but she would also want me to protect all of you. I can't do both, and it's better that I kill him rather than one of his full siblings. I can live with myself afterward, for sure. I'm not sure you could. I've always hated killing, even the Regians. You're right. I don't know if I could bring myself to kill Castiel. I know. It's one of the things I like about you. One of the things I'm going to miss. Darius is going too. I saw him getting ready. I'd rather not take him, but I have to. I'm going to need him. How does he feel about it? Carina shrugged. He wouldn't come with me if he didn't want to. Obviously, I won't expect him to kill his brother. And Bryce? He doesn't know anything about this. You two still aren't talking? That's ridiculous. You're both being stubborn. It isn't stubbornness. Neither of us is like that. I'd be happy to patch things up, but he isn't interested. He's moved on, and probably for the best. He'll find a nice non-mage partner on Earth, someone who doesn't make him feel inadequate just by existing. He has millions to choose from. No, he won't. Bryce has been through thick and thin with you. He won't be happy with anyone else. You two are made for each other. I thought so too, once, but it isn't going to work. I pushed him too far, and I don't think he can ever come back. He will. He just needs time. Carina doubted it, but she didn't bother arguing. She had an important job to do. Near the ancient mage hideaway in the mountains, all was still. Even the ever-present wind had dropped to nothing. A hot sun baked the rocks. As Darius brought the mercs in, they quickly took stock of their surroundings. "Where'd you stash the equipment, Lin?" Pamuk asked. Carina nodded to the dip in the slope where she'd put the armour, rifles and other equipment she'd transported down from the Bathsheba. "I still say we should blow the place from orbit," Jackson grumbled. He had been the last of her transports from the ship. "Yeah, 'cause no one's going to notice, right?" Carina asked sarcastically. "Quit with the stupid suggestions, Jackson," said Van Hasty. "This might be our last chance for a fight, and I'm gonna take it. Shit, Earth's boring. I've never known such a peaceful planet. Even Magog was more interesting." "You didn't come with us to Magog," said Carina. "Exactly." The rest of the mercs were retrieving weapons and donning armour. Carina and Darius suited up too. She opened a comm to her brother. "Do you feel him?" "Yes, he's already here." Whether Castiel had set watchers who had spotted their arrival, or if the mountain was his permanent abode, wasn't clear. But her intuition about where she would find the dark mage had been correct. "Are we transporting in?" asked Jackson. "Or assaulting from outside?" "There's only one entrance I know of, and it's only one man wide. You'll take a team, scout it out, and assess the level of defence. Remain outside to catch anyone trying to escape and await orders." "What do we do with them if they come out?" "If they surrender, take them prisoner." "What if it's your brother or Key?" Allowing either man to live any longer than necessary was too risky. "Kill them on sight. Just remember they're older now, much older." "Don't worry," said Jackson, hefting a rifle. "I won't take any chances." She could only transport mercs to the areas she'd visited inside the mountain. They were only a small portion of the interior, from what she could tell, but it couldn't be helped. With luck, they would have the element of surprise. No lookouts from the mountain had been spotted, and Castiel didn't have any of her or Darius's personal items. The plan was to quickly mow down any opposition and then execute Castiel and Key. She hoped that, on this peaceful world, their soldiers only comprised the men and women they'd brought on their galactic journey, and few had been recruited from the local population. She hoped the defenders would surrender rather than die, though it was unlikely. Castiel had probably fed them endless lies. On the plus side, she didn't anticipate encountering many mages. From the ones who had come forward and revealed themselves since the arrival of the Bathsheba, it was apparent that Castiel's main method of persuasion had been convincing them that non-mages would hate and persecute them. The reception Carina and her siblings had received from Earth's public had put the lie to his assertions. Much of his mage support had melted away. Yet, no doubt, a few mages remained who he was controlling by more nefarious means. She and Darius would have to be on their guard. "Ready?" she asked. He nodded. "Let's put an end to this, once and for all." She began to cast. First, she transported dogs into the mountain. Then she transported herself and Darius to the great chamber with the waterfall. Already, flashes of pulse fire lit up the exits from firefights going on outside, though their hiss couldn't be heard over the roar of the cascading water. She dragged her brother to the chamber's edge, where a protrusion gave a little cover. The cavern seemed empty. The only moving things were the waterfall and the ripples in the pond at its base. "He's here!" Darius exclaimed. "He's close!" She couldn't see Castiel, but she didn't doubt her brother's words. She switched her comm to external. "Castiel, your plan has failed. We've won. You have two choices. Leave Earth forever or face the consequences of your actions." There was a moment's pause before Castiel's voice floated back, thin and faint, over the crash of falling water. "The consequences of my actions? That's rich. As I recall, it wasn't I who murdered my dear father. It wasn't I who executed Sable Dirksen in cold blood, condemning her to a horrible fate without even the justice of a fair trial. They earned their deaths, the same as you'll earn yours if you don't get off this planet. Even if I agreed with you, which, needless to say, I do not, I am sadly unable to comply. The starship we arrived on was destroyed long ago, so unless you plan on giving me yours..." He was stalling. Castiel would never agree to her terms, even if she did put the Bathsheba in his hands. She scanned the chamber. The immediate area was clear. She looked upward. The walls were smooth, impossible to scale. Castiel could transport soldiers in, but something was moving within the waterfall, a shadow behind the silver curtain. The endless rush of water had scooped a hollow in the wall. She fired. The pulse round hissed against the water, creating a burst of steam. There was the thinnest sliver of a gap between the vertical stream and the rock. A rifle muzzle poked out from the curtain. She fired again. The soldier fell without a sound, tumbling down and disappearing into the pool. "I see your aim has improved," said a voice. So Key was here too. "I had a lot of time to practice." Castiel needed a line of sight to attempt to split them, but they had good visibility. He couldn't sneak up on them. No one could. Any soldiers he transported in, Darius would transport right out again. They might get a few shots off, but there was plenty of elixir for healing, and if things got too dangerous, she and Darius could leave. They could survive a long time playing cat and mouse, but that wasn't the point. "Darius," she commed, "we have to go to them." While the exchange had been going on within the chamber, the external fighting had intensified. An enemy soldier stumbled through one of the entrances, fell down face forward, and was still. "I know," Darius replied. "They must be on the far side of the pool. It's the only spot we can't see." "I'll transport us there." "No, I'll do it. I want you to conserve your elixir. And remember your promise, right?" A pause. "Right?" "I remember." Before they'd embarked on the mission, she'd made him swear that if she was killed, he had to leave. He would need elixir to do it, and she wanted him to not use it all up in the fight. He had to reserve a mouthful to transport out of danger. She commed Van Hasty, who was within the depths of the mountain, attacking Castiel's defenders. "I know where you are, the place with the waterfall, yeah? Stay put until I get there. Resistance is heavy, but we're breaking through." Carina waited, watching for signs of another attempt to reach them. Castiel would be growing impatient, and he was undoubtedly receiving the news that his troops were being defeated. A comm arrived from Van Hasty. "We're in. Where are you?" Carina cast. As they arrived on the other side of the waterfall, it took her a second to get her bearings. 3 figures stood under an overhang, armoured up. She turned to the entrance. It was empty. Where was Van Hasty? A pulse round flashed. Darius gasped. He'd been hit. She fired back and grabbed her brother's arm, hauling him toward the gap. More pulses flashed past. Key was firing, and perhaps Castiel too, though that had never been his style. The third person had to be his daughter. Perhaps she was the other one shooting. "He's casting," breathed Darius. There was a gulp as he drank elixir. While Darius was casting repulse against Castiel, he was defenseless. Carina pushed him into the passageway, but soldiers were running down it, and they were not dogs. Where the hell was Van Hasty? Carina pumped shots at the 3 armoured figures in the cavern, spraying them with fire, then focused on the approaching soldiers. Too late. White-hot heat exploded at her neck. She'd been hit. She fought down a shriek and struggled to hold on to her rifle and continue firing. Her suit's analgesics kicked in, forcing the painkiller through her skin, and the agony faded. But the scent of her burned flesh told her it was a serious wound. She had to cast heal, but there was no time. She needed a reprieve, but Darius couldn't help. He had his hands full repelling casts. She had to transport them and get them out of the fighting, at least until Van Hasty turned up. She sucked on the tube leading to her suit's reservoir. Nothing. No elixir had spurted into her mouth. The pulse round must have destroyed the tube. Darius! He was on his knees. He'd taken another hit. He couldn't defend himself, and she couldn't take on attackers from 2 directions. Where were the mercs? There had to be another cavern with a waterfall somewhere in the mountain, and Van Hasty had gone there. The enemy soldiers had nearly reached them. She fired into their midst. One fell, but the others rushed up, grabbed her, and threw her down. They'd torn off her armour. Darius knelt beside her, also without his suit. Her poor, sweet brother was burned. Castiel, Key, and Letitia had removed their helmets. The trio stood in a row, gazing down at their kneeling captives. Carina saw Key for the first time since arriving at Earth. The Dirksen commander had aged significantly. His cheeks were sunken in, and his eyes sat deep in their sockets, though they were as dark and intelligent as ever. "Carina Lin, if I'd known you would kill Sable one day, you would never have left your interrogation alive. Strange that you would feel so strongly about such a terrible person, Key." She winced as pain lanced her neck. Was it really worth devoting your life to getting revenge for the execution of a monster? You have no idea of the depths and richness of her personality. You did the galaxy a great disservice when you deprived it of her presence. It's long past time for a reckoning. "Long past time," Castiel agreed. "For that and many other things. I don't know what you hope to achieve by killing us. You've lost the mages under your control. Parthenia will turn Earth into somewhere they can live without fear. Your time here is over, whether we survive or not. You underestimate the great satisfaction your deaths will bring me regardless. And you overestimate Parthenia's abilities. Though she may persuade the public not to hate her, she will have my hatred for the rest of her life, which I aim to cut short as soon as I have the opportunity." "Don't do it," said Darius. "We're family. You and I are brothers. We grew up together. For a long time I looked up to you."
You can still change, Castiel. You don't have to do this.
He chuckled, putting away his elixir canister and pulling a gun from a holster.
Sweet little Darius, mother's darling, how I hated you from the very minute you were born, before anyone even knew what a powerful mage you were. Fern and Oriana were always stupid but tolerable. You, however, were something else. I knew for a long time I couldn't allow you to exist.
I'm sorry, Carina whispered. Darius bowed his head.
You don't have anything to be sorry for, sis. How touching, said Castiel. I would so love to make a great display of your deaths, to show the world what should have been done to the evil arrivals from the stars. But though it pains me to say it, your mercenaries are closing in. We must make quick work of this and then retreat to a safer spot.
The soldiers who had brought them to the chamber had left to defend it. Van Hasty seemed to have finally found the right place at last, though she was still beyond helping them. What about you? Carina asked, lifting her gaze to the woman at Castiel's side, who hadn't said a word during the entire exchange. It's Letitia, isn't it? Darius, meet your niece. She looked away. Now Carina could get a good look at Castiel's daughter. Her likeness to Ma struck her more forcefully than ever. Tears of grief sprang to her eyes. I did my best to save them, Ma. I tried my best.
Weeping won't help you, sneered Castiel. You won't find any mercy here.
Is this what you want? Carina asked Letitia.
How dare you address her?
Castiel demanded.
Be silent.
He aimed his gun at Darius.
Key, let's do the honours. Carina is yours, and I get to kill Darius, as we agreed.
Key lifted his rifle. He leaned over her, so close she could smell his breath. His dark eyes became intense, his features concentrated fury. He hates you, Carina snapped at Letitia. You know that, right? You've always known it. She sprang upward, headbutting Key in the stomach. Air exploded from his lungs, and the old man landed heavily on his backside. A flash of light lit up the dim space. Someone had fired. Not Darius, please! Carina turned to see what was happening with her brother, but Key kicked her legs out from under her. As she struggled on the ground with the downed commander, she yelled, Letitia, come over to our side. You can live freely as a mage. There were sounds of fighting, but she couldn't make out what was happening. Key was trying to grab her, but he was too weak, too old, and he continued to hold on to his rifle. She forced his arm away, crying out, You'll never please your father, Letitia. He'll hate you forever. She twisted Key under her and drove her knee into his chin. There was the crack of shattering teeth. Blood ran from between his thin lips. A second flash ignited the cavern. Please don't let it be Darius. Key's head lolled and his grip on his rifle loosened. She wrested the weapon from his grasp and spun it round, leaping up. The old commander raised his hands as if to ward her off. She fired. Key was no more. She turned. Darius was down, a crumpled figure on the cavern floor. Dead? No! She ran to her brother. The horrible scent of burned flesh was rank in the atmosphere. A little way off were two figures, one kneeling, the other standing.
Don't do it, darling,
Castiel pleaded.
You know I love you.
It isn't true, Carina screamed. She touched Darius. He was warm, but that didn't mean anything. And with their suits gone, she had no elixir to heal him. The woman's head swiveled toward Carina's. Their gazes met. You know the truth, Letitia. You know it. She returned her attention to her father. Castiel rose to his feet unsteadily.
You wouldn't dare.
He drew himself to his full height, turned and took a step away with a dignified air. Letitia shot him in the back. Chapter 36. Carina healed Darius with Castiel's elixir. From what Darius said when he came around, their brother had fired at him, but at the last millisecond Letitia had pushed Castiel. The round hadn't hit its mark, and so Carina could bring Darius back. The daughter and father must have been the pair she'd heard fighting. Eventually Letitia had got the upper hand, and with the truth of Carina's words ringing in her ears, she'd delivered the coup de grace. Then it was only a matter of waiting for the black dogs to complete their mission. They left Castiel and Key's corpses in the cavern. Neither of them deserved a decent burial, and though their presence besmirched the ancient place, the mages who had lived there had departed millennia ago. It was only a deserted cave in the mountains. The long story of the Dark Mage's hatred for his family was finally over. They could live in peace, which in some ways made Carina's delivery of her decision harder than ever. After several days of gathering courage, she explained to her siblings what she intended and her reasoning. "It has to be this way. I'm sorry." "No, it doesn't," Parthenia sobbed, trembling with shock. "You can't do it. I couldn't bear it." Oriana simply wailed, unable to verbalize her sorrow. Darius hung his head. "Is this what you want?" Fern asked him quietly. He nodded. "Carina's right." Nala turned away, running her fingertips under her eyes. Parthenia asked, "Does Bryce know about this?" "I haven't told him," Carina replied. She hadn't seen any reason to. "Then I will. I bet he'll have something to say about it." "Whatever he has to say, it won't change my decision." Ever since asking Darius to use the summon cast to speak to the mages on Earth, the fate of the mages they'd left behind had weighed heavily on her conscience. They had no spirit mage, no way of coming together, and their lives were already hard and dangerous. If she could return to her sector with Darius and find them, she could tell them about Earth, the safe haven for mages. They could build colony ships and one day arrive at a true home for themselves and their descendants. "You'll take the Bathsheba?" Fern asked solemnly. "Everything about her has been downloaded to some place or other on Earth. If someone wants to build another colony ship, they can. They don't need a model to copy." "But you can't fly her alone," Parthenia protested. "She's massive. It's impossible." "I know I can't do it alone. Shao and some of the black dogs have agreed to come along. I got their agreement before I told you." "No way!" Fern exclaimed. "They only just got here." "They don't like Earth." "Don't like it?" Oriana squeaked. "What's not to like? Earth's lovely." "They spent most of their lives aboard starships and fighting battles. There's nothing for them here. And if Jackson stays, he's going to prison." She recalled asking Shao if she would be prepared to fly back across the galaxy. The small woman had grinned and replied, "You know me, Carina. I'm not interested in making decisions. I just follow orders." "No, seriously," Carina had said. "I know it's a big ask. You'll be giving up the chance for a peaceful life planetside. But I'm a starship pilot. You think I'm going to have fun ferrying tourists to and from the Bathsheba? I love that ship, and you're offering me the chance to stay with her forever. Why would I turn you down?" Carina took Parthenia's hands. "You must continue what you've been doing, building trust between non-mages and mages, and make Letitia one of the family. She's had a hard life growing up as Castiel's daughter." Her sister bowed her head and tears dripped onto their joined hands. "We could all be dead by the time you come back, if you ever do." "Then I'll meet your children. They will be beautiful and wonderful, like you." A great sob burst from Parthenia, and she pulled Carina into her arms, weeping on her shoulder. Carina held on to her sister as she cried. "We've been through so much. And we've grown to know each other so well. I'll never forget you." For a long time Parthenia couldn't speak. Eventually she broke their embrace. "I understand what you must do. It's just that it hurts so much. It hurts me too." Fern and Oriana were hugging Darius. Nala hugged Carina, and suddenly they were all hugging.
"What's going on?"
Bryce had arrived. He was looking at them darkly. "Carina and Darius are leaving on the Bathsheba," Oriana said. "They're going to find the mages in our sector and tell them about Earth." He caught Carina's gaze and narrowed his eyes. Then he left. "Well, now he knows," said Fern. The day before their departure, Carina approached Darius. Once they left, there would be no turning around, and though her task would be nearly impossible without him, she felt bad about asking him to come with her. She wanted to offer him the option to back out gracefully, without hard feelings. "Darius, are you sure about this? You have your whole life ahead of you. You shouldn't have to spend it always helping others."
"Some people are born to a life of service. I was, like you."
"Like me?"
"What else do you think you've been doing all this time except helping mages?"
"I always thought I was doing this for myself."
"Really? That doesn't sound like the young merc who rescued a frightened little boy from his kidnappers."
Then she knew he was right. The Earth authorities were not aware of her plan. Telling them would have created needless complications. There would have been objections, perhaps attempts to prevent them from leaving, but in reality they had no say in the matter. Too soon, all the tearful reminiscing and promises to stay safe and live happy lives were over. It was time to fly to the Bathsheba and begin the final preparations to depart the system. The core of the Black Dogs had boarded the shuttle, except for Jackson, who, unable to show himself in civilized regions, had already been transported back to the ship. The only new passenger was Alfie Binger. He'd begged to be allowed to join the expedition. Carina had agreed on the proviso he told no one else about it. She couldn't imagine fielding the thousands of Exodus testifiers who also wanted to come along. Standing at the base of the shuttle steps, Carina was saying her final goodbyes to her siblings, drinking in the sight of them, committing their faces and voices to memory. They'd spent years in close confinement on their starship voyage, too close at times. She knew and loved them inside out. It was not enough, but it would have to be. She climbed the steps and turned to take a final look at Earth and the people it was breaking her heart to leave. Someone was riding a bicycle across the landing field. The rider was clearly new to the skill, for the bike swerved and wobbled alarmingly. When he reached the shuttle, he leapt off it. The bicycle continued on and crashed into the vessel, bounced backward and fell onto its side, the wheels spinning.
"Carina!"
Bryce yelled.
"You're really going to leave without me?"
He raced up to her and grabbed her shoulders.
"Tell me you weren't going to go without even a word."
"What is there to say? We made it to Earth. You can make a home here now."
"I don't want to make a home on Earth. I came here because I wanted to be with you."
"But I have to leave. I have to go back."
"Then so do I."
She smiled up at him, joy breaking through her sadness. "Let's make the Bathsheba our home." The end. This has been Neverwar, Mage Saga Book 9, and the final book in the Mage Saga series. For more JJ Green books, visit jjgreenauthor.com.